Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary...
Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've got a lot coming up on the program today. Chauncey DeVega is going to be with us in just a moment. We're asking the question, how do we prepare for the end of the Trump presidency, among other things. Rick Wilson will be with us. He's got a new book out called Everything Trump Touches Dies. Yes, he's a Republican. And Paul Levy's going to drop by in our third hour about quantum physics and Wetiko. a concept that, well, we'll talk about it in the third hour. And there's a pile of news out there. But let's start out with Chauncey DeVega. Chauncey is the political essayist and commentator, contributor with Salon. He's got a new piece up on Salon, in fact, about Nazism and Trumpism. He's also the host of the Chauncey DeVega Show podcast. His website, Chauncey DeVega, DEVGA.com. And you can tweet him at Chauncey DeVega. Chauncey, welcome back to the program.
Always a pleasure to have you. To be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. I wanted to start with this piece that you wrote, Are White People Ready to Bail on Democracy? These researchers say the danger is real. Can you set that up for us, please?
Well, we know, looking at American history, that racism is a dagger of sorts at the heart of American democracy.
Want to connect with the show online?
From Trump's hate rallies to his overt racist and nativist speech, we're actually starting to get a lot of good empirical data. And one of the things we're learning, again, from political scientists, sociologists, and others, is that Trump voters and white Americans who are racially resentful in general are much more likely to believe that we should cancel elections, that we should suppress that we should restrict the free press, that if Donald Trump basically ordered a rollback of democracy, that they would go along with it. And why is that? Because of social dominance behavior and anxiety about America's changing demographics. So unfortunately, we have too many white Americans who are willing to make a bargain, basically saying, you know what, it's a zero-sum game. And if we can't run the show to American democracy, then it can be damned.
Yeah, and so what do we do with that? I mean, actually, let me Kamala Harris over the weekend talked about I'm not afraid of identity politics. James Baldwin was asked about this. Geez, I don't know the year, but probably back in the 60s. And here is what he had to say. I'd just love to get your take on his comments too.
So why must we always concentrate on color or religion or this?
Commentator, we're not hearing any audio here, Nate or Sean. I don't know who's got the audio. Okay. Anyway, Chauncey, we'll just continue here. What do we do with this? I mean, how do we address white people about this issue?
Well, I mean, as you and I have talked about repeatedly, we need to state the facts plainly. And the obvious fact is that America has only been a democracy on paper for 50 years, and that's since the end of the civil rights movement, at least formally in terms of the popular imagination. So in terms of thinking about history can move forward, but in terms of American democracy, it's been a very, very slow march, and we can lose the little democracy that we have very quickly. So the easy answer would be, in a perfect world, we fix our educational system. We make sure that we have a true we the people democracy. We work to create multiracial, cross-class alliances at every level of American life. But if someone were to give me the big bucks and say, hey, Chauncey, man, what would you tell the Democrats to do in terms of strategy? What would you tell liberals and progressives? I'd say stop wasting your time trying to win over Trump voters. We have a ton of data, again, showing us that these folks are authoritarian, that they are resistant to cosmopolitanism. They want to live in the past and not the present. And, I've spoken to some of the leading experts on Trumpism. I go out and instead of, working with conjecture like some of the talking heads do, I want to try to figure out what we know empirically. And what I'm seeing over the years of studying Trump and Trumpism and working on my own book is that Trump voters cannot be reached. We need to work on those Americans who are on the fence and those other Americans who simply didn't vote. Yeah. These Trump cultists are a lost cause, and we need to stop worrying about them.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. Yesterday, there's a documentary. It's called Documenting Hate, Charlottesville. It's going to premiere on PBS on the 7th, which is tomorrow, and on your local public broadcasting TV station. And in that documentary, they're making the case that the Charlottesville, there's about 500 of these right-wing white supremacist protesters in Charlottesville, and that group kind of split into three. And one of those three groups is out still protesting out in public. We saw this in Portland this weekend. Another part of that group, and I don't know the percentages here, but another part of that group has gone into more of kind of a Koch brothers mode, for lack of a better way to describe it. Recruiting on college campuses, trying to get inside political parties. Becoming political or Republican campaign chairman or, within the Republican Party anyway. And a third group has split off and said, we're going to start killing people, and we're going to do it quietly, essentially. And we're not trying to be the Weather Underground. We're not, trying to be famous. We're just going to start killing people. And yesterday, at 3 o'clock in the morning yesterday in Madison, Wisconsin, the progressive radio station there, WRT, somebody walked in and shot a guy. And, you know, he's still alive, but he was shot. What does all this, how does all this inform you? And how would you tie this back to your current piece in Salon about how the Nazis dealt with this and how we should be dealing with it?
Well, I think, again, we always need to speak truth to power. We've had too many folks in the mainstream corporate news media, because they've given Trump $5 billion in free advertising, who are willing to still normalize this man. So the first thing we need to understand is when Trump calls the news media, journalists and reporters, enemies of the people, well, that's Stalinist rhetoric that, again, is part of a trend we've seen over the decades with right-wing Republicans and others using eliminationist rhetoric against Democrats, liberals, non-whites, immigrants, and others. So we need to, again, check that box off. And thinking about my piece today, again, saying, you know what, it's both reasonable and appropriate to compare Donald Trump and Trumpism to Hitler and Nazism. You don't want to wait until it's too late. Because once it's too late, there's nothing that can be done. We have all these folks wringing their hands saying, well, is Trump like Hitler? Oh, is that a fair historical analogy? The man is certainly a fascist. He's certainly a racial authoritarian. We have a ton of data about that. And he certainly is, again, holding a dagger at the heart of American democracy. And with Trump and his voters and his supporters, if you look at these hate rallies, does any reasonable person have any doubt in their mind that if Trump again said go out and start killing people, go out and start attacking journalists, which he has basically said, that they wouldn't do it? And again, thinking about this moment and this enemy of people moment, and I mean, that's really important research, thinking about how these right-wing hate groups have splintered. We need to, again, stop wringing our hands. Again, the mainstream corporate news media types. The New York Times today had a piece basically trying to whitewash the Republican Party's association with Nazism. There's a reason that David Duke and other neo-Nazis, Richard Spencer and white supremacists are attracted to the Republican Party, because they agree with them. And the Republicans, for the most part, going back to the Southern strategy, agree with them as well. They're just upset about the style and the presentation. And that goes all the way up to Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you see this going, Chauncey? And what's your biggest concern?
Well, I don't think this ends well. As I said, I've spoken to many historians and others about this moment. To some, this will sound dramatic, but I don't see this ending without some sort of civil unrest, quite frankly. And now the question then becomes, what is the scale? We've already seen killings and murders. We saw that in Charlottesville. We saw that in Portland. And another important issue we have to talk about with the far right, who are increasingly the center of the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is embracing these people's strategies. They're embracing their policies. Again, there's a huge overlap in the Venn diagram, is we need to have an honest conversation about how America's police are infiltrated and allying with these white supremacists and neo-Nazis. Across the country, there's been some great research on this. We saw this over the weekend. Who do the police protect? The gun-toting right-wing thugs.
Yeah.
Because why? Because they see them as being more representative of the mainstream. And that's, again, not me, playing with a riff here, right? Sort of just working with conjecture and rhetoric. We've had research where they basically interviewed the police and looked at internal documents, and the police said, yeah, we side with the neo-Nazis and these violent right-wingers because, quote unquote, they're more American than the folks who are protesting them.
Well, we heard from some of the folks who were involved in the protests in Portland over the weekend that I can't make this as an absolute assertion. This is, more in the category of somebody told me, but that the police and the right wingers here in Portland had actually communicated and had a kind of a pact. Don't worry, everything's going to be good. And thus, the guy who got shot in the head, he had a helmet on with a tear gas canister, was one of the left-wing protesters, as opposed to one of the right-wing guys. And this kind of stuff going on. This is what you're saying is happening all over the country?
Oh, yes, and it's remarkably underreported. I mean, I think there's another thing that's going to come out once social demographers start looking at the data. I think we have seen a remarkable rise in interpersonal violence related to Trump's campaign and presidency. And I think also it's going to come out, again, underreported because there's always a lag, that once we get the data from the FBI and local police who, again, think about how police report data, some of that data is remarkably unreliable, and they try to sit on it, just like they do with violence where police are killing innocent people in the street. I think you're going to see a lot of murders and assaults by Trumpsters and their allies, these neo-Nazis and white supremacists, against black and brown folks, immigrants, and others. And we've already seen the murders. And going back to your point about the police in Portland, another huge underreported story, they're going to have another anniversary of the Charlottesville white supremacist hate festival, that horrible riot that killed Heather Heyer in D.C., and they were actually going to have separate trains for Kluxers, white supremacists, and neo-Nazis. Those are our tax dollars. And thank God the brothers and sisters in the local transit union in D.C. dropped a dime on this. They want to use state and public money to protect these fascists.
Well, the first piece I read on that was not that they were trying to do it to protect them, but rather to segregate them so that there wouldn't be violence in the metro system in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think the practical function of that is basically that we're spending public monies to protect these folks, right? And I mean, it's a double insult in a lot of ways, because who's instigating the violence? Who has the guns? We saw that in Portland. It's these white supremacists and neo-Nazis. They're the ones who are escalating the violence. And to have black and brown folks, the majority of whom work in the transit system down there in D.C., to have to sit there and escort and use public money to protect these bigots, it's abominable. But again, it's part of a pattern where this hate is being normalized.
Yeah, and we're also seeing things like, you know, the murder of Nia Wilson, for example, underreported. I mean, you know, it's spurred some protests and whatnot, but it's not the kind of national story you would expect. At the same time that, you know, for example, the gun violence in Chicago, where you live, has been heavily reported. I think it's the right wing's favorite, chant, I guess. Thoughts on those?
Well, I mean, that's just part of a pattern, right? So look at black and brown folks and say, look at Chicago, and use all sorts of racial slurs. Go to Stormfront, go to Fox News comment sections. But then when you flip the script and say, okay, we have a problem across the country with gun violence, and never mind where these guns are coming from, Indiana, let's talk about the violence in this country and mass shootings, again, disproportionately committed by white men, especially right-wing Trump supporters. I mean, those are huge underreported stories where you look at the horrible massacres at these schools the last few. A lot of these men had connections, these young teens and boys. They were advocates of Donald Trump. They were his supporters. So, I mean, that's just a lazy deflection to hide the fact that a lot of these Trump voters, again, thinking back to the Republican Party, where conservatism and racism is now one and the same thing, that they don't want to speak the truth about the real social dynamics of this country.
Yeah, and the conservatives who don't want to buy into this are left just basically being corporatists. Chauncey DeVega, ChaunceyDeVega.com. Thank you, Chauncey.
Always a pleasure.
Great talking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's 18 minutes past the hour. And I'd like to recap some of the news of the day and some of the stuff that's going on. I mentioned Nia Wilson, this 18-year-old woman who, along with her sister, she was killed. Her sister was stabbed, and her sister Latifah, injured and stabbed on the BART, the train system in San Francisco. And you know, in fact, when it first happened, I was looking at the story and going, well, we don't have evidence that this is a racially motivated attack. Now they've arrested a white guy for it, so you know it's looking more and more like it was, and it was one of several murders on the trains. Other things going on: the Iran sanctions are kicking in today. This is something to absolutely keep your eyes on, because if World War III begins, it may well begin in the Persian Gulf at the Straits of Hormuz, with Iran shutting down the flow of oil out of that area. And I mean, literally World War III. If Iran shuts down the Straits of Hormuz, and then the United States or Israel or both, or Saudi Arabia for that matter, and attacks Iran, Iran fights back, Russia comes to their aid, pretty soon you've got a full-out shooting war and what could become a nuclear war. So keep very careful track on that. Donald Trump tweets out about the wildfires in California. This is incredible. He says, California wildfires are being magnified and made so much worse by bad environmental laws. Must tree clear to stop fire spreading. He means must clear trees, but you know, the timber industry has been saying this for years. You know, if you don't want to have wildfires, you got to get rid of the trees. Right? It's like if you don't want people to drown in the rivers, drain the rivers. This is how bad it gets. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, they just expelled the ambassador from Canada, the Canadian ambassador, because this Saudi Arabian activist by the name of Badawi, and I hope he's not related to our old friend who used to be a regular guest of mine, who I know is Saudi. But in any case, he's been arrested in Saudi Arabia and sentenced to 1,000 lashes and years in prison for, quote, insulting Islam, a progressive activist inside Saudi Arabia. This is, just wicked bad stuff. And I mean, terrible, terrible stuff. And how we can say that, you know, we're just all about defending Saudi Arabia in the region just because they sell us oil and we don't care about their civil rights. This all started out, Krista Freeland, who's been a guest on this program, wrote a brilliant book about the rise of the uber rich. I think it was called Plutocrats. I'm quite sure it was called Plutocrats. She is now the foreign minister for the country of Canada. And over the weekend, or a couple of days ago, she tweeted out her concern about Mr. Badawi being arrested in Saudi Arabia. And this is the Saudis saying, how dare you interfere in our domestic policies? How dare you tell us that we can't arrest our own dissidents? Meanwhile, the Chinese dissident YY, or Weiwei, forgive me, I don't have the story in front of me. You know, his studio, he's a relatively famous artist. He's the guy who designed the Bird's Nest Olympic Stadium in Beijing. They started tearing apart his studio last week. This actually made international news. So we'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stick around. Welcome back. 23 minutes past the hour. I was going to play this James Baldwin clip for Chauncey, but it's just as good to play it for you, so you can check this out. This is James Baldwin speaking on the issue of race in the United States. Now, you know, keep in mind this was, you know, probably after the Civil Rights Act, but in that neighborhood of time. I'm not exactly sure when this was. It could have even been in the 70s, but it's just such a brilliant articulation. I wanted to share it with you.
So why must we always concentrate on color or religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men. So
Because
why must
once you turn your back on this society, you may die. I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only conclude what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Other news of the day, some just interesting things I want to share with you, just catch you up. This falls into the category of, wow, what a coincidence. Donald Trump on August 5th tweeted, this was yesterday, tweeted that his son actually was trying to conspire with a Russian lawyer representing the Russian government to obtain information that would be destructive to Hillary Clinton to use in a political campaign, which, by the way, is clearly and explicitly against the law. August 5th. August 5th, 1974, so Trump releases, basically, on August 5th, releases the information that probably will bring down his presidency. And on that same day, August 5th, 1974, that's the day that Richard Nixon released the White House tapes under order from the Supreme Court. What is it about August 5th? It's amazing. We'll see how this plays out. But I find it just fascinating. I told you about Saudi Arabia. Okay, Amazon is asking cities all around the United States, they've got 20 cities now, saying, yeah, we'd love you to come to our town. We'll give you a lot of money. We'll give you tax breaks. We'll make you very profitable. It'll be just wonderful. Only problem, it's being done in a privatized fashion. This from today's New York Times. The headline, cities offers for Amazon base are secrets even to many city leaders. Jared Evans, Julie Cresswell writes, a member of the Indianapolis City Council, is proud that the city is among the 20 finalists for the most coveted prize in the country, the planned second headquarters of Amazon. He does, however, have one small question. What financial incentives did his city, Indianapolis, dangle in front of Amazon? What have I been told, Mr. Evans said? Absolutely nothing. Yes, he's on the city council. The bids, Julie Creswell writes for the New York Times, the bids were handled by a local private Chamber of Commerce affiliates. They aren't required to make their negotiations public. They're not covered by the Freedom of Information Act or state open records laws. And so you get these, this is a Leslie Poole, a city council person in Austin, Texas. I don't know what we offered Amazon in terms of financial incentives. So the private chambers of commerce are negotiating these deals on behalf of the cities, and the cities have no idea what's being offered, but they're going to have to pay it. And we're talking billions. New Jersey, $7 billion. Maryland, $8.5 billion given to Amazon.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's like privatization has just run amok. It's gone nuts. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCatherine gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCatherine saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hello, Tom. I want to talk about the concept of, quote, free speech and deplatforming, because just recently,
free speech and what?
Hours ago.
Oh, deplatforming. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
Oh, sorry. Okay, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, deplatforming. I want to talk because a couple hours ago, Alex Jones's YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, and other social media outlets were
and Apple took down his podcast
banned.
too.
Yeah, exactly. And they've been permanently banned and removed from the air. And I'm saying I think this is a really good thing for our democracy, because Alex Jones is effectively a form of cancer. He has been, I would argue, actually, that the reason we have Trump is because of Alex Jones. And what do I mean by that?
Jared? Jared? Jared just vanished. Jared, if you can hear me, call right back. I hope that we're not having a systems failure, because that might be a conspiracy. Roger in Bisbee, Arizona. Hey, Roger, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Good morning.
Hey.
Was impressed with the article that you just had with Chauncey DeVega, and it made me think about some things that have happened over the years. I kind of have seen what Chauncey's talking about. When I was in the military, I was kind of appalled to see what was happening with the folks coming into the military to get the training, to get thought, to get thrown out. All they really wanted was the training, and they'd get out on a bad conduct discharge or whatever the case may be. But I think
you mean right-wingers coming in just to get military training?
Yes, that happened a lot. A lot of the guys that came in, they just wanted the basic training. They wanted to know how to use the guns. They wanted to know the tactics, and then they'd get thrown out.
Wow.
Then they'd show up in the right wing side of the House. I think the Southern Poverty Law Center did an article on that several years ago. That was very
That's
interesting.
pretty amazing. I mean, I can't imagine, geez, going through, joining the Army just to learn how to shoot a gun. I mean, there are shooting ranges all over this country that would be glad to teach you how to shoot a gun.
It's not just shooting the gun. It's learning the tactics. It's learning about the high-powered weapons. It's learning about the explosives and a lot of the other things that we're seeing employed.
Yeah, but explosives aren't taught in basic training. I mean, but in any case, you were going somewhere with that thought, Roger. Where were you going?
Well, the thought I was really going with is this has been building for a long time. What we're seeing happening now, I think, honestly, I think the same thing has been happening in the police arena as well as it was in the military. And we're seeing that. And I think that's what Chauncey DeVega was pointing out, is that we're beginning to have the empirical evidence now that some of this stuff's been going on for quite some time. Progressives or liberals, of course, have always been held in the Republican side or the liberal side or not the liberal side, but the conservative side is, not really being involved in and always wanting to avoid any kind of aggressive action. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking we need to look at our progressive history, some of the things progressives had to do over the years to establish our rights and establish our democracy, so to speak. And we need to start looking a little bit more into what it's going to take to defend this democracy.
So you're talking about people arming themselves?
Well, I'm talking about people arming themselves, or not. That sounds like a really overt thing.
Yeah.
What I'm really talking about is liberals need to have a little bit of a change of thought process. They need to be thinking more in terms of getting shot on the BART, being more attentive of what's happening around you. If that means you need to, get a concealed weapons permit in your state, if you can do that, or if you see that's happening around you, you need to be prepared. Because if you're not prepared, if the proverbial stuff hits the fan, you're out and you're going to get shot. You're going to get
God
killed.
forbid.
You have no defense.
Roger, I get what you're saying, and there's an argument, I think, to be made for particularly people who are fairly high profile. I know a fellow talk show host here in Portland has a concealed carry permit and always has his gun with him. And I get that. But, violence in general, I look back at the 60s and you see where the Black Panthers, who were not violent, but they used weapons to make a point, particularly back in the 60s in California, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. That was like brilliant political theater. On the other hand, when a faction of SDS, and by the way, that was on behalf of essentially oppressed people, of black people in the United States. On the other hand, when a bunch of white people from SDS split off and formed the Weather Underground, you get these privileged white college kids who were going out and blowing up buildings and things. It set the movement on behalf of left-wing policies, right? We're going to blow up buildings to bring racial equality and health care for all to America. That was, in my opinion, a huge mistake. So, my thoughts on that. But Roger, thank you for your call. Jared, you wanted to finish your thought here?
Yes. I wanted to, Alex Jones, I am support deplatforming Nazis like Alex Jones because they're a cancer on this society, namely that they were the ones prior to even Trump running. He was the one talking about, we should be friendly with Russia. We should be subservient to Russia, along with Michael Savage, who were the ones who basically created Donald Trump using this racist rhetoric, like, these Central Americans are coming over the border.
Right. Well, they weren't alone in that, Jared. I mean, right-wing hate radio, pretty much right across the spectrum, got on the Trump train really early. And I would say helped ride him to the victory in the primaries, along with CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, and MSNBC, and Fox, obviously. But all the other networks, they gave him $2 billion worth of free publicity during the primaries and during the general election.
But has any Republican ever cultivated the conspiracy theory vote before, prior to Trump? mobilizing millions of these Alex Jones psychopaths in the country?
I don't know, and I mean, you could go back to the '70s, the assassination of Alan Berg. I mean, it's possible, but I think it's extremely unlikely. But I don't know what we do with that, Jared, other than say, if you're a Nazi and you've got a radio or TV show or a conspiracy, many platforms don't want you on there. Facebook doesn't want you on there, Twitter doesn't want you on there, et cetera. But I don't think that it's necessarily because Alex Jones is like a right-winger or even necessarily a Nazi, although I think Nazi is probably beyond the pale. But it's that he's constantly, or he has a history of saying things that aren't supported by the evidence. And by saying them, he's putting people's lives at risk, particularly when he went after the families of the Newtown, the Newtown families and whatnot. And so that's a strong argument to deplatform somebody. You are actually putting people's lives at risk. I stand behind everything I say on this program. And somebody calls and says, you got that story about so-and-so or such and such wrong. I'll put them on the air. We'll correct ourselves when we're wrong. I want people who are listening to this program, who are watching this program, to feel a high level of confidence that what I'm telling them is the truth. I don't think that that's what Alex Jones does. I think what in fact, he's characterized himself. There's a book that has we had the author of it on maybe 10 years ago, that has a chapter in it about Alex Jones. The guy, followed Alex Jones around for a few months as he was writing this book about all these different conspiracy theorists. And Alex Jones was saying, no, I'm just a performer. This is just theater. And, whether he's not so much saying that anymore, but if you're taking it as performance or if you're taking it as, crackpot stuff, it kind of doesn't matter. If he's also claiming that it's news and it's fact, and it's not, then that's a good reason not, to deplatform him, to take him off. Am I making sense here, Jared?
Yes.
I'm saying do it based on whether it's true or not and whether it's dangerous or not based on whether it's left or right or however he's trying to position himself ideologically, because I don't think he's that much of an ideologue. I think he's an authoritarian who's looking, and a conspiracy theorist who's looking for an audience. And the fact that we're talking about him is giving him more of an audience, which is why I generally don't talk about Alex Jones.
Yes.
So.
But I think it is good that we at least call these people out who are doing this, because they have been, as I've been a lot of this stuff that Trump ran on, all this conspiracy theory garbage and the QAnon stuff, all this originally came from, Alex Jones's site. And I also believe that QAnon is a Trump official. I've come to that conclusion.
No, let me give you some information on QAnon that'll blow your mind. This is Brian Broderick is a reporter over at BuzzFeed News, and he tracked down. There was a novel called Q that was published in the 1990s. It was written by 3 Italian leftists, Roberto Bui, Giovanni Cattabria, and Federico Guglielmi, under the name of Luther Blissett. And in this novel Q, this character who is inside the International Monetary Fund is dropping breadcrumbs and helping to reveal this international conspiracy. And it was a huge hit among the anarchist anti-globalization movement in the late 90s. And he's of the opinion, these 3 writers, they told this reporter, quote, dispatches signed Q, allegedly coming from some dark meanders of top state power, are exactly like the dispatches in our book. So it looks like this was a left-wing punking prank against to the right-wingers, and the right-wingers grabbed it and said, oh, yeah, okay, this must be true. And the danger now is that the right-wingers, no matter, even when you come out and tell them, hey, it's a left-wing joke that you fell for, they're not going to believe it, and that's going to take us down. Jared, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. It's always good to hear from you. Chris in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey Tom, did you catch the Times article this morning that they did about Oregon and Portland in general, and how because here in Oregon, we all kind of know that this is a very, very white state, and really Multnomah County, even Washington, Clackamas, and Clark are very solidly red in a lot of parts, and Portland still has a lot of work to do with respect to.
Yeah, Portland has Portland was a really rough city in its early history. I mean, right up until probably the last 30 or 40 years, and it was, a lot of people, it was a port. You had a lot of dock workers and things. I mean, people in Portland brag about the fact that we've got more strip clubs than churches, and so it's got a kind of a rough history, and it's also got a right-wing white racist history. The Klan was really big here. The Nazi movement is really big here. So yeah, I didn't read the article, but I know about it.
You got a major right-wing host, up there in Portland. In any event, I kind of wanted to speak to dog whistle racism. You were actually the first one that kind of told me about it, and I was doing a little bit of reflection over the weekend and figured out the way that you're going to get like the swing vote and the moderates is to actively denounce the dog whistle stuff. I feel like with moderates and people that are low information, if the Republican Party starts the soft dog whistle, like the Mexicans are coming here and taking your jobs, right? That doesn't sound like they're sending murderers, rapists, and thieves, and some are good people, I guess. That was more so. So my thing is that you placate moderates with all this really soft stuff, and then you get them on the edge, and then you're like,
well, that's what they've been doing since Nixon, and since Reagan in a big way, since Manafort was running Reagan's campaign or participating in Reagan's campaign along with Lee Atwater. Thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 48 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where smart people get their news. The Thom Hartmann Program will be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Charles. Oh, hey, Charles. I'm sorry. You're listening on Sirius XM. They're in a commercial break right now. Damon in Seattle. Hey, Damon, what's on your mind today?
You actually had an earlier caller that touched on many of the things I want to talk about, but I just want to talk a little bit about how the danger I see in the degree to which those of us on the left, and particularly the progressive movement, have really been sort of rallying behind media talking points regarding gun control and like assault weapon bans and things of that kind. And I just wanted to reiterate the idea that, when you look at who is the most armed in this country, and when you look at the danger of the extreme right wing and the fascist tendencies that are, and straight up, fascist goals that these people are putting out, for the left to buy into the programming on guns equal bad and we need all these additional restrictions, I feel is kind of naive and dangerous, especially when you look at the fact that racist, right-wing criminal justice policies have already invalidated large swaths of people who might have an inclination towards social justice from being able to own firearms in terms of criminal convictions, medical marijuana cards, things of that kind. And I just think it is important for people to realize that when one faction of this country seems to be preparing for war and the other faction is preparing for a debate, it seems like it does put us in kind of a precarious position long term.
Yeah, I get that. And yet you're going to find a lot of people who just simply have no interest in arming themselves. And I don't want to be doing the NRA's work for them here, Damon.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not a member of the NRA, and I don't exactly think they're good guys. In fact, I mean, they're kind of part of the problem in the sense that they're not really a gun rights organization so much as they are.
No, I get that, but my point is they're all about selling guns, making profits for the gun manufacturers to whom they owe their existence. And
well, it's not just the gun manufacturers, though. I mean, there's definitely like the fact that they have not really done anything to come to the aid of people of color who have had their Second Amendment rights infringed. people who've been killed for. There's a racist component to the NRA that makes them beyond the pale in many ways. But a thing I wanted to point out, like as you mentioned, many people don't have an interest in arming themselves. But I think the message that I would like to put out to those people is that those of us who abhor violence, that for those who abhor violence to concede its means to those who do not abhor violence is kind of a dangerous thing. Like the fact that we on the left tend to be anti-war, anti-violence, pro-peaceful solutions, to me is precisely the reason why the left needs to get right with defending themselves and potentially their nation, because we really are.
What Gandhi would tell you is the minute that you pick up that gun, you have surrendered your ability to have moral persuasion. That peaceful protest, even if it leads to your being a martyr, is always going to be more effective than violent reaction.
Oh, no, I 100% agree with you that peaceful means are the way to go for the time being. My point is that we currently have a very fascist government, a overly religious and right-wing racist, police force, and massive legions of militia people who are could be potentially effective brown shirts in some kind of a fascist, takeover.
No, I've been writing about this, but it's still, that's not enough to make me, or I'm guessing a lot of other people think, oh, gee, I got to buy a gun. Damon, thank you for the call. We'll be back. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I'm a little frustrated today, though.
Okay, with what? What's up?
With this Donald Trump thing. I mean, if he comes out and says that his son had a meeting, now he's coming clean, that Don Jr. had the meeting and it was opposition research. First of all, it's against the law. So we're not talking about collusion. He didn't collude, but he definitely conspired.
Yeah.
And he should go to jail for that. And I've been asking you over and over, how come it seems like the power of the people that vote Democrat, how come our power have been usurped? It seems like I would think that Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or any other bulldog that we have that's supposed to be out there on the left, how come we aren't asking this man to step down now and get out of there?
Well, there's a number of Democrats who are, Charles. There's a lot of them. And by the way, the other shoe that is falling right now out of the White House, and this I've only seen this in one news source, so I don't know. I can't say that I'm absolutely certain that this is true. But my understanding is that Donald Trump has canceled all his travel plans and that Sarah Huckabee Sanders has not yet scheduled a press conference for today, and that the White House has gone into major lockdown freakout mode because yesterday Donald Trump admitted that his son had committed a federal felony and claimed he didn't know anything about it. You got Michael Flynn, he and his son were working, it's alleged that they were conspiring with the Russians. And when his son got dragged into it, Michael Flynn said, if you're going to prosecute my son, I'll turn state's evidence and I'll go to jail. Just leave my son out of this. Remember that, Charles?
I remember that. I remember
okay.
that clearly.
So then Donald Trump comes out yesterday and says, Oh, you want to prosecute my son? Yeah, this is the crime he committed, and by the way, I knew nothing about it. Leave me alone. It's like, really? So,
well, you know, this is past ridiculous.
yeah.
And I just got to say to any right wing out there that wants to have insurrection, we've already killed Nazis back in the past, like World War II, and we've definitely killed Confederates back in the past. Those stars and bars.
Oh,
So
Charles, I'm going to cut you off right there. I don't even want people talking like that on this show. It's just, this is, you know, threatening to kill people is wrong. It's illegal. I mean, this is, you know, Brian Stelter was threatened on, I think it was Friday. Somebody called into C-SPAN and said that they were going to shoot Brian Stelter and Don Lemon. And it's like, stop already. We've all got to stop and say no. You know, this, you know, and I got a caller a little while ago saying, oh, it's time for, you know, liberals to start buying guns. No. I mean, you know, if you're inclined, but broadly, no. The response to violence should not be violence. It should be, you know, law enforcement. It should be strengthening our national dialogue and debate. And yeah, you know, this guy said, oh, people want to declare war on you and you want to have a conversation. I think we still need to have a conversation, and I think that we need to have strong laws that will take down the people who are trying to declare war on us and have those laws well enforced. And we need to clean up our police departments as well in that regard, to the extent that there's a problem there. But, you know, most of our police departments are pretty solid. And I was, you know, I'm frankly surprised by the whole thing with the Portland Police Department, because we've got a relatively progressive, you know, police chief in this town. So anyhow, we'll be back. It's the top of the hour. We've got... Rick Wilson's going to be with us right after the top of the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brain waves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. For our book club today, we're reading Out of the Wreckage, A New Politics for an Age of Crisis by George Monbiot. This is from Chapter 3, Don't Look Back. The political history of the second half of the 20th century could be summarized as the conflict between its two great narratives, neoliberalism and social democracy. Social democracy in this era, whose story I briefly summarized in Chapter 1, acquired much of its power and coherence from the thinking of one remarkable man. Across 4 decades, John Maynard Keynes's work dominated economic thought and practice. During the period the French called the Trente Glorieuses, 1945 to 1975, his prescriptions are widely credited with reviving economies and distributing their benefits. That they remain more or less the only mainstream alternative to neoliberalism today reveals a remarkable stagnation of both thought and ambition. The first and most obvious problem with an attempt to use Keynesian social democracy as a core political narrative is that the story is more than 80 years old. Political stories need to be renewed. If politics does not feel fresh, it struggles to kindle the imaginative excitement from which hope arises. The second problem is that the surviving enthusiasm for Keynes among mainstream parties is highly selective. It has been reduced in most cases to lowering interest rates when economies are sluggish and engaging in tepid counter-cyclical public spending, which means injecting public money into the economy when unemployment is high or recession threatens. Other Keynesian measures, such as raising taxes when an economy grows quickly to dampen the boom-bust cycle, the fixed exchange rate system, capital controls, and a self-balancing global banking system, an international clearing union, all of which Keynes saw as essential complements to these policies, have been discarded and forgotten. Not only does this ensure that the rich old story has been reduced to two thin chapters, whose loss of context destroys their narrative power, but the absence of other Keynesian measures, as well as changed global circumstances, weakens the effectiveness of the remaining elements of policy. Let me give you an example. In 2009, in the hope of boosting the economy in the wake of the financial crash, the British government spent £300 million on stimulating sales of new cars. Under its scrappage scheme, if car owners traded in their old vehicles for new ones, the government, with the help of manufacturers, knocked £2,000 off the price. This lavish program was partly justified as an environmental measure, though it was clear from the outset that it would lead to a rise in environmental impacts as the materials and energies used in manufacturing new cars outweigh any likely savings from better fuel economy. Its primary purpose was to boost British car assembly plants and protect the jobs of their workers. But European state aid rules forbade such schemes from discriminating between cars made in Britain and cars made abroad. British car parts assembled only some 15% of the vehicles sold in that country, which meant that 85% of the benefit went to car plants in Germany, Japan, and other manufacturing nations. We could see this spending as foreign aid to some of the world's richest nations. The current pattern of globalization, which developed partly as a result of abandoning the fixed exchange rates and capital controls that Keynes advocated, ensures that this problem is to some extent repeated wherever Keynesian stimulus spending is applied. It might lead to a general, if scarcely detectable, global economic uplift, but the domestic impact will necessarily be weaker than Keynes intended. This issue is compounded by the phenomena of job-free growth, caused in part by the automation now spreading into almost every economic sector. Today, governments pull the starter cord, spending public money and cutting interest rates, that ignited the economy and employment in the past, only to discover that it snaps before the motor fires. Two feeble measures, removed from the rich framework of thought and narrative in which they were once embedded, have little chance of sustaining a political revival. Another issue is that the troubles that beset the Keynesian model in the 1970s have not disappeared. While the oil embargo of '73 was the immediate trigger for the lethal combination of high inflation and high unemployment, called stagflation back then, that Keynesian policies were almost powerless to counteract. Problems of the system had been mounting for years. Falling productivity and rising costs push inflation, wages and prices pursuing each other upwards, were already beginning to erode support for Keynesian economics. Most importantly, perhaps, the program had buckled in response to the political demands of capital. Strong financial regulations and controls on the movement of money began to weaken in the 1950s as governments started to liberalize financial markets. Richard Nixon's decision in '71 to suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold destroyed the system of fixed exchange rates on which much of the success of Keynes's policies depended. The capital controls introduced to prevent financiers and speculators from sucking money out of balanced Keynesian economies collapsed. Today, it's hard to find a mainstream politician in Europe or the Anglophone nations, including those who call themselves Keynesians, prepared to call for their reintroduction. We cannot hope that the strategies deployed by global finance that helped to destroy the efficacy of Keynes's measures in the '70s will be unlearned. If the soft Keynesianism proposed by opponents of neoliberalism is to amount to anything but tinkering, it has to confront a wider set of challenges than most of its advocates have yet been prepared to acknowledge. But perhaps the biggest problem residual Keynesianism confronts in the 21st century is that when it does work, it collides headfirst with the environmental crisis. The book, Out of the Wreckage by George Monbiot.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In a few minutes here, I hope, Rick Wilson will be with us, and we're going to talk about Trump and the possible end of the Trump presidency. In fact, I think there he is. Okay, great. On the line with us is the author of the new book, Everything Trump Touches Dies. The subtitle, A Republican Strategist Gets Real About the Worst President Ever. It's by Rick Wilson. Rick Wilson is a Republican strategist, and his Twitter feed is the Rick Wilson. And Rick, do you have a website? I don't see it here.
It's TheRickWilson.com.
Say it again?
TheRickWilson.com.
TheRickWilson.com. Cool. Rick, you're a Republican strategist and have been involved in Republican campaigns for years and years. You know the Republican Party. Donald Trump tweeted yesterday that it's just a normal thing to reach out to a foreign government and ask them for help to take down your adversary in a political campaign. Is that true?
You know, Tom, I've been involved in Republican politics for 30 years, and there are a few things I've never done, and one of them is to reach out to hostile foreign powers representatives to ask them for dirt on an opponent. Because I don't think I can think of anyone, Republican or Democrat, in my history in politics, as I said, for almost 30 years now, who would do that. It's unthinkable. So, of course, that's what the Trump people did. Because it was unthinkable, they decided to go ahead and do it.
So here's the weird coincidence, Rick. On this day in 1974, or yesterday, August 5th, on August 5th, 1974, Richard Nixon, under orders from the Supreme Court, released the White House tapes, which led to the end of his presidency a few months later. On that same day, yesterday, Donald Trump released the apparently truth about this meeting that his son and Jared Kushner and others had with these Russian lawyers and Russian representatives of Russian oligarchs in Trump Tower. Do you think that this is the end of the Trump presidency? I've heard from two sources now that the White House right now is in lockdown, that Trump's travel plans have been canceled, essentially, that Sarah Huckabee Sanders is not going to be holding a press conference today. I mean, all this may change. It's a very fluid situation. But apparently there's like major freakout going on in the White House.
Well, Tom, if you were in the White House, I think you'd be freaked out, too.
Yeah.
I mean, he has exposed his own son to legal jeopardy. That tweet will go down in history as one of these tweets heard around the world because it had so many levels of bad in it and so many downside consequences to it that I think we're going to look back and say that was a real inflection point where he opened himself up and opened his son up to even greater legal pressure. A lot of this was stuff that Robert Mueller already knew. But thanks for the confirmation, Don. You know, this is a guy who truly doesn't understand the scope of the peril he is in. And so we're ending up in a situation, in my view, that while this may not be the end, this certainly opened up a gigantic chest wound in the Trump administration. And the legal vulnerability they had all along has now been enhanced. So, you know, it's one of the things I talk about in the book. This is a guy who thinks he is such a genius about negotiation and about the world. And he's lived in this bubble all along of New York, sort of tabloid BS.
Right.
And now that he's hitting the wall of reality, and that part of that wall is named Robert Mueller, he's having a really bad time.
Yeah, it seems. It will take 17 Republicans in the United States Senate to remove Donald Trump from office. That was not a big lift during the Nixon administration when the Republicans, who were big supporters of Richard Nixon just 6 months earlier, realized how corrupt Nixon was and how crazy he was in some ways. Do you think that this tweet is enough to have pushed him over the top with some number of Republicans in the Senate and possibly 17, or is it going to take a lot more than this?
I think it's actually going to still take more than this, Tom, because this is a party that is basically, it lives in terror of Donald Trump. He is in many ways a political terrorist for Republican elected officials. They live in mortal fear that he's going to tweet about them or talk about them in a bad way, because the moment that happens, then come the death threats and the craziness and the Fox News coverage about them, and their lives turn, upside down. So he still has a lot of them very much intimidated.
Yeah.
But I will say this. I talked to a member of the Senate a couple days ago. We were having a conversation, and he said, he's a guy who's been publicly supportive, privately skeptical, as many of them are. And he said, he goes, I read what you said about Nixon, and, we stood up there as Republicans in 73 and said it's a witch hunt, it's the liberal media. And in 74, we lost 49 House seats and 8 Senate seats.
Yep.
And corruption kills, and that's another thing I've seen in my long career in politics, is that the years where you're perceived to be the corrupt party, right or wrong, in 94, the Democrats, the House bank scandal hurt them terribly with average voters. In 2006, Abramoff and Mark Foley hurt Republicans terribly in 2006 elections. And so that perception, if it becomes that this is the party covering for a corrupt president who is in bed with with Russian government officials, I think it could lead downstream consequences that really hurt a lot of the elected folks who think they can get away with it.
We're talking to Republican strategist Rick Wilson. His new book, Everything Trump Touches Dies. Rick, let's talk character for a minute. Michael Flynn, regardless of what you may think of him and his behavior, he had this consulting company that his son was involved with. And the consulting company apparently committed crimes that involved collusion with the Russians and the Republican Party and being in the White House and all this kind of stuff. And when Robert Mueller started sniffing around his son, Michael Flynn Jr., Michael Flynn came out and said to Mueller, according to numerous press reports, if you're going to take my son down, this is where I draw the line. I will turn myself in. I will confess to whatever you want. I'll turn state's evidence. Just leave my boy alone. Donald Trump, on the other hand, says, oh, you've got some dirt on my son? Well, here's the real evidence. Put him in jail. By the way, I knew nothing about it. What does that tell us about these two men?
Well, look, I mean, Michael Flynn at least proved that for all of his terrible judgment and his flirtations with the Russians, that at least there's some tiny scrap of honor about his family left inside of him. And the best case scenario you can make for that tweet from Donald Trump is that he's just not that bright, and he thought he was going to get his son out of trouble, and he got him into it. But the darkest interpretation is that this is a guy who hates everybody, and who will do anything to preserve his own position and freedom and power, and was willing to put his son under the wheels of the bus. That's the dark interpretation, and Trump tends to lend himself to the darker interpretations as a general rule. But this was clearly something that he will regret no matter what. I mean, this is going to make for an awkward family Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, to say the very least. It seems to me that there's probably two major possibilities here with regard to this tweet by Trump. One is that he somehow thought that if he could just put it out there, that would mean that it wasn't, a conspiracy or a crime. It wasn't a cover-up any longer. It's out in the public domain, so it's all good now. That kind of thing, that he just was fundamentally uninformed about the law, okay? That's one possibility. The other possibility is that he doesn't give a rat's ass about the law, that he really and truly believes he's above the law, and if he can just convince enough Americans that they should side with him, that they will prevent him from being impeached, they will prevent the courts from doing their job, or even that he thinks that at some point he needs to stop the law essentially and just flip us into an authoritarian dictatorship. Now I think that's like one of the darkest interpretations, to use your phrase. What are your thoughts on that polarity?
Look, I think there's that Venn diagram, those three circles of that Venn diagram could all overlap.
Yeah.
He could definitely believe the wrong things about the actual statutory impact of his behavior and his confessions. He could definitely believe that he may have done something illegal and can get away with it if he just browbeats people hard enough and rants long enough. And he could definitely believe that, as a president, he is unconstrained by the law. And I think it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is, to say the least, authoritarian curious.
Yeah.
He is a man who, loves Putin, loves the strong men of the world, the Dutertes and the Kims and the Zs of the world, and he has a sense of sort of machismo and swagger that his fans may love, but it's a sense of a different kind of American presidential leadership that leads to a very dark place when it's been tried in millions of other or hundreds of other cases around the world over time, and I think that it's a great danger to our democracy and to our republic if we start letting a president of any party get away with treating the rule of law like it's optional.
Yeah, Republican strategy. I'm sorry, you finish your sentence.
I was just going to say, and I think that's one of the most dangerous things about Trump is that the law means nothing if it inconveniences me politically. That's a bad precedent.
We're talking to Republican strategist Rick Wilson. His new book, Everything Trump Touches Dies. Rick, last question. Typically most of the listeners to my program are Democrats, I'm guessing, or progressives in general. But there are a lot of Republicans who listen, and a lot of them call in and sometimes agree, sometimes disagree. What would you say to those people who have been Republicans for 30 years like you, who are not sure what to do now?
Well, I would say this, is that there are a lot of principles in the Republican Party's tradition that we need to get back to. And some of those principles had gotten a little bit lost even before Trump. But the adherence to the rule of law, the actual adherence to the Constitution in ways that sometimes are inconvenient for parts of the Republican base, to return to a sense of real adherence to the rule of law, to get back to the sense that conservatism isn't about social engineering on the right. We object to it on the left, and we should not try to make it about that on the right. We should be a party of limited government, of personal freedom and responsibility, and of the things that have shaped our better traditions.
And not Donald Trump.
To accept this.
Rick Wilson, his book, Everything Trump Touches... Hang on just a second. Hang on just a second.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The book is Everything Trump Touches Dies. Rick, thanks so much for being with us, Rick.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
Yep.
And welcome back. Tazio in Ithaca, New York, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Tazio, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I thought there's a few people calling about guns, so I thought I'd call in on the other side.
Okay.
I think we should just, if you have a gun and you're against guns, I think you should just give it away. Give it to the police department or turn it in. I think that's the best way to protest against guns.
So instead of arming ourselves against the armed right-wingers, we should be working toward gun regulation that's going to make it harder for right-wingers to get guns? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think we're stuck in a very awkward place now. I think why we have a lot of bans against assault weapons is because that thing you read about on your show sometimes in the 1960s when the Black Panthers armed themselves with assault weapons to protect themselves against police, scared the hell out of Reagan, so he banned a lot of weapons.
Yeah, it wasn't assault weapons, by the way, just FYI. It was shotguns and there was one hunting rifle and I think a bunch of pistols, but back to you.
Okay. Well, regardless, I think it was a weird thing that they banned, and I think it put us in an awkward place.
Yeah.
And, I think working on refining legislation, I'd be fine with banning all assault weapons and pistols.
Oh, yeah. I think we should, frankly, ban all semi-automatic. We've banned automatic weapons. We should also ban semi-automatic weapons. These are weapons of war and law enforcement, and that's where they should be limited to. Tazio, thank you. Well said. Benjamin, watching Free Speech TV in Madison, Mississippi. Hey, Benjamin, what's on your mind today?
Well, I was going to ask you about is dumb the new racial slur, but I'll let you respond to that later.
I think it is. Trump seems to only call black people dumb.
Oh, yeah. He never called Rosie O'Donnell, Jeff Flake, the guy that does them on Saturday Night Live, none of those people. He never calls them dumb. Robert De Niro. No, you're right. He only does that with black. But anyway, that's not what I was calling about. You had a guest on earlier that said something about only right-wing people do these mass shootings.
I don't think he said only. We know now that the Vegas shooter, for example, the guy who killed the most people, in the last couple of years was a right-wing ideologue and a conspiracy theorist.
Who is that? Who are these right-wing people?
I don't remember his name. The guy who shot up Las Vegas.
No, it's not been proven.
Yeah, look it up.
But I can tell you this.
Look it up.
The Columbine students' parents were Democrats.
Their parents might have been Democrats, but the kids were certainly right-wingers. They loved their Nazis.
The Paul shooter was Democrat. The Virginia Tech shooter was a Democrat. The Fort Hood shooter was a Democrat.
I don't know where you're getting your list from, Benjamin, but I'm not believing it.
You don't think the Muslim that shot up the Fort Hood was a conservative?
I don't know, and you don't know either.
Yes, I do.
How?
Yes, I do. It's been proven.
Yeah, right.
Go
okay.
look up.
So I'm telling
shooter.
you to go look up the Las Vegas shooter, and you're telling me to go look up the Fort Hood shooter.
I've already done it. The guy that shot Gabby Giffords was a Democrat.
Yeah,
the
right.
Sandy Hook shooter was a Democrat.
You know.
Okay. The DC
so this tells us what, Benjamin? Let's say that you're right. What does that mean? Anything?
That means that your guy was wrong.
Oh, okay. All right. Well.
Okay.
Put a pin in it. Benjamin, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back 22 minutes past the hour. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Get back to your calls. This in today's New York Times. There's a couple of these from today's New York Times that are just shocking, and they're really worthy of our paying attention to. The first is that the American stock market is shrinking. Yes, that's the headline. An article by Jeff Sommer in today's Times, or actually it's August 4th Times, but it's kind of worked its way up to one of the most forwarded stories. He writes, the American stock market has been shrinking. The market is half the size of its mid-1990s peak and 25% smaller than it was in 1976. Now, you hear me on this program talking all the time about about corporate consolidation. Well, media consolidation is a dimension of that. Corporate consolidation, these giant conglomerates basically taking all the money, and it's harder and harder. Speaking as a guy who has started 7 businesses in his life, small businesses, every one of them, started them all from scratch. It has reached the point now where it is damn hard to start a business in America. Why? Because these giant companies, Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1982. We are no longer enforcing this law, and therefore companies are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more powerful, and in the process wiping out their small competitors. In the mid-1990s, there were 8,000 publicly traded companies available in the United States. So if you wanted to invest in a company, you had 8,000 to choose from. Today, or by 2016, there were only 3,600. Today, there's fewer than that. And here's where it gets really shocking. Profits. In 2015, the last year that we've got all the numbers for, the top 200 companies in America by earnings accounted for all of the profits in the stock market. Let me repeat that. 200 companies, the top 200 companies, accounted for all of the profits on the stock market. And the remaining 3,281 public listed companies all lost money. That's breathtaking. Meanwhile, older Americans, people over 65 years old, are declaring bankruptcy at rates we have never seen before. This is where we were in 1933, 34, 35, when finally, I guess it was 1935, that FDR rolled out Social Security. And one of the reasons he rolled out Social Security is that, you know, older people were literally dying of starvation, dying of well, not so much starvation, but malnutrition-associated illnesses, dying of cold in the winter, dying of heat stroke in the summer. They didn't, I mean, poverty was widespread among people over 65. The rate of, this from today's New York Times, Tara Siegel Bernard writing, "Too little, too late, bankruptcy booms among older Americans." The rate of people 65 and older filing for bankruptcy is 3 times what it was in 1991. That's a 300% increase. Why? Reaganomics. We've gone from 2% in 1999 of people filing for bankruptcy being over 65 to 12%, 12.2% now. In fact, they say the aging of the baby boom generation can't explain that increase. So what does explain it? Professor Thorne says the only explanation that makes any sense are structural shifts. What do structural shifts mean? Well, it's very straightforward. You know, people can no longer afford their health care. People don't have the kind of income that they had from, you know, Social Security doesn't pay as much as it used to, and now it's taxed thanks to Ronnie Reagan. And they don't have, and they've got 401ks instead of pensions. So people are retiring with less money. They have access to less money. It's harder and harder for them to get resources, and the costs of healthcare have exploded, which is one of the disproportionately high costs for elderly people. We're back where we were in the 30s. I mean, we're back where we were in the 30s with the Dust Bowl, and now we're back in the 30s with older people being destroyed. This is terrible stuff.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And this is why we need to look back to FDR and LBJ's Great Society and say that's the Democratic Party, and we're going to reinvigorate and reinvent it. Today we're reading in Thom Hartmann University Book Club from How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, Time-Tested Methods for Conquering Worry by Dale Carnegie, perhaps an appropriate book in the era of Trump. This is from Chapter 2, a magic formula for solving worry situations. Would you like a quick, surefire recipe for handling worry situations, a technique you can start using right away before you go any further in reading this book? Then let me tell you about the method worked out by Willis H. Carrier, the brilliant engineer who launched the air conditioning industry and who headed the world-famous Carrier Corporation out of Syracuse, New York. It is one of the best techniques I've ever heard of for solving worry problems, and I got it from Mr. Carrier personally when we were having lunch together one day at the Engineers Club in New York. When I was a young man, Mr. Carrier said, I worked for the Buffalo Forge Company in Buffalo, New York. I was handed the assignment of installing a gas cleaning device in the plant of the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company at Crystal City, Missouri, a plant costing millions of dollars. The purpose of this installation was to remove the impurities from the gas so it could be burned without injuring the engines. This method of cleaning gas was new. It had been tried only once before and under different conditions. In my work at Crystal City, Missouri, unforeseen difficulties arose. It worked after a fashion, but not well enough to meet the guarantee we had made. I was stunned by my failure. It was almost as if someone had struck me a blow on the head. My stomach, my insides began to twist and turn. For a while, I was so worried I couldn't sleep. Finally, common sense reminded me that worry wasn't getting me anywhere. So I figured out a way to handle my problem without worrying. It worked superbly. I've been using the same anti-worry technique for more than 30 years. It is simple. Anyone can use it. It consists of 3 steps. Step 1. I analyzed the situation fearlessly and honestly and figured out what was the worst that could possibly happen as a result of this failure. No one was going to jail me or shoot me, that was certain. True, there was also a chance that I could lose my job, and there was also a chance that my employers would have to remove the machinery and lose the $20,000 we had invested. Step 2. After figuring out what was the worst that could possibly happen, I reconciled myself to accepting it if necessary. I said to myself, this failure will be a blow to my record and it might possibly mean the loss of my job. But if it does, I can always get another position. Conditions could be much worse, and as far as my employers are concerned, well, they realize that we're experimenting with a new method of cleaning gas, and if this experience costs them $20,000, they can stand it. They can charge it up to research, for it is an experiment. After discovering the worst that could possibly happen and reconciling myself to accepting it, if necessary, an extremely important thing happened. I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in days. Step 3. From that time on, I calmly devoted my time and energy to trying to improve upon the worst which I had already accepted mentally. I now tried to figure out ways and means by which I might reduce the loss of $20,000 that we faced. I made several steps and finally figured out that if we spent another $5,000 for additional equipment, our problem would be solved. We did this, and instead of the firm losing $20,000, we made $15,000. I probably would never have been able to do this if I had kept on worrying, because one of the worst features about worrying is that it destroys the mind's ability to concentrate. When we worry, our minds jump here and there and everywhere, and we lose all power of decision. However, when we force ourselves to face the worst and accept it mentally, we then eliminate all these vague imaginings and put ourselves in a position where we are able to concentrate on our problem in the here and now. This incident that I have related occurred many years ago. It worked so superbly that I've been using it ever since, and as a result, my life has been almost completely free from worry. End of quote. Now, why is Willis H. Carrier's magic formula so valuable and so practical, psychologically speaking? Because it yanks us down out of the great gray clouds in which we fumble around when we are blinded by worry. It plants our feet good and solid on the earth. We know where we stand, and if we can't have solid ground under us, how in creation can we ever hope to think anything through? Professor William James, the father of applied psychology, has been dead since 1910, but if he were alive today and could hear this formula for facing the worst, he would heartily approve. How do I know? Because he told his own students, quote, "Be willing to have it so. Be willing to have it so," he said, because acceptance of what has happened is the first step in overcoming the consequences of any misfortune, end quote. The same idea is expressed by Lin Yutang in his widely read book, The Importance of Living. True peace of mind, says this Chinese philosopher, comes from accepting the worst. Psychologically, I think it means the release of energy. That's it exactly. Psychologically, it means a new release of energy. When we have accepted the worst, we have nothing more to lose. And that automatically means we have everything to gain. After facing the worst, Willis H. Carrier reported, I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in days. From that time on, I was able to think. Makes sense, doesn't it? Yet millions of people have wrecked their lives in angry turmoil because they refuse to accept the worst, refuse to improve upon it, refuse to salvage what they could from the wreck. Instead of trying to reconstruct their fortunes, they engaged in a bitter and violent contest of experience and ended up victims of that brooding fixation known as melancholia. Would you like to see how someone else adopted Willis H. Carrier's magic formula and applied it to his own problem? Well, here's one example from a New York oil dealer who was a student in my classes. I was being blackmailed, the student began. I didn't believe it was possible. I didn't believe it could happen outside the movies, but I was actually being blackmailed. And, he goes on with his story. It's a fascinating one. How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Pick up your calls here. Pastor John in New Haven, Connecticut, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Pastor John, what's up?
Hey, good morning there, my brother Tom. Listen, I want to make 2 points, and I want to ask your opinion on a second point. Number one, only love can cast out hate. Love is the answer.
I agree.
Nonviolence is the answer. We are a democracy, and therefore the way we fight is at the polls. Would you agree with that?
I would. I do.
Now, my second thing is, if I could ask you, in order to protect our election coming up, and I've listened to Malcolm Nance and also Sarah Teensor or something like that, where they said that, the Russians might mess up in this election and do things, and they said that we all should vote massively and vote early and vote on paper.
And triple check that you're still registered to vote, because the Republicans have knocked several million people off the voting rolls nationwide just in the last year.
Yeah, and here's what I'm asking our listeners, if it's okay with you. I'd like us all, in all 50 states, because I can't do it by myself, to call up your Secretary of State and ask them what are they doing to protect the sanctity of our election, number one. Then number two, call up your elector or your clerk and ask them, do you have a paper ballot, so that we can protect this election. To see, by Trump saying the Russians are helping the Democrats, if the Democrats win, he may say, well, you know what, this election was not valid.
Yeah.
That's a real thing that could happen. And then you could have some real bad things happening.
I think Trump is already trying to set that up, excuse me, where, he's been claiming, Democratic, pardon me, that there's all these, quote, illegal immigrants who are voting and stuff like this, which has been just totally taken apart, disputed, blown up, whatever you want to call it. And in fact, I think it's the Secretary of State of Maine, who was on the Chris Kobach voting commission, has now come out and said, he sued to get all the documents because they weren't sharing them with him. And and he's come out and said, okay, I've seen all the documents. And not only was Chris Kobach and Donald Trump lying to us all about this stuff, but they were also trying to conceal their lies from people like me who were also on the commission. So, this is a big deal. Pastor John, thanks for the call. I agree with you. I think that love ultimately conquers all, and I realize it sounds, kind of, airy-fairy to say that. No, I don't think so. Mahatma Gandhi was a warrior. Jesus was a warrior. Martin Luther King was a warrior in the best sense. That is, a true agent of change. Chris in Chicago, listening on WCPT. Hey, Chris, what's up?
No, hi, Don. Hey, if I have something unusual to talk to you about, I have to call Friday, right?
Yeah, generally speaking. Well, actually, throughout the summer, we're saying it's anything goes summer, so, until Labor Day.
Oh, okay, I'll call you some other time.
What's your
I want to ask you, now, what about the survivalists and the state militias? When are they, if there's unrest, when do they crawl out of their holes? Who controls them?
What do you mean? What am I missing?
Pardon?
What am I missing here? I think that's already happening. I think, for example, the Las Vegas shooter apparently was one of these survivalists. Adam Lanza's mother, the Newtown shooter, was a survivalist. I mean, I think they're already crawling out of their holes.
Yeah, because, those guys, if you give them a fertile field, they'll be coming out in droves.
Yeah.
I remember Michael Savage, who was, I couldn't believe that guy was a brutal racist, but he was on the air. He was talking that there's 30 million of those guys, and he can hardly wait till they're mobilized.
Yeah, Michael's still on the air. I don't know that he's a racist. I've spent a fair amount of time listening to Michael Savage, and I've not heard things that I would say were overtly racist. But
he paid a tribute to the white man building the United States. One of
oh, did he? Oh my God! I mean, most of these guys, they're masters of dog whistle racism, if nothing else. But I don't want to be, getting on my colleagues, particularly when I don't know exactly what they're saying right now. But your question about who controls the state militias and should we worry about the survivalists? Yeah, I think, the state militias, the answer to your question is the governors. Each state militia is, the governor is essentially the commander-in-chief of the state militia. So, that's the situation. Chris, thanks a lot for the call. Good to hear from you. Michael in New York City. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I'm vacationing right now in Cape Cod, but I'm still listening to you.
Oh, sweet.
Thank you. And to add to what you're saying about Trump and company and these Republicans thinking they're above the law, that you remember that there is a court order, a federal court order for Trump to reunite the children and the families that he separated through his ridiculous policy. And instead of complying with that law, with that court order, I should say, he's busy attacking the media via Twitter. He's attacking athletes, LeBron James in the NFL. He's attacking minorities and still repeating the BS of immigrants and Mexicans being bad and so forth. And he's rallying up his base, or should I say inciting violence with his base. And meantime, you got these children, some of them have gone fiercely sick and ill. There's one report that one of them died while under Trump. And then you have also another incident of, sexual crimes committed.
Yeah, there's actually been multiple incidents of that, Michael.
Multiple incidents. And then what's going on also is that, oh gosh, I forgot. that Mr. Trump, he's going to say in response that, oh, what about the children? Let the ACLU handle that. So you're turning to the ACLU, your court opponents, to handle the mess that you have made, and you're defying further the court order that tells you to fix it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, Michael, and thanks for bringing the topic up, because I had the story here and I was going to share it with people earlier, and I'm not sure what happened to it. But the federal judge...
I mean, they say... I'm sorry. I mean, they always kept saying, lock her up when it comes to Hillary. Maybe we should be chanting, lock him up.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Benghazi investigation lasted 4 years. The Hillary email investigation lasted 2 years. The number of indictments was 0. So far on the Trump investigation, there have been 36 indictments, if my memory serves me correctly. I just retweeted that. But the point that I was making, Michael, just a moment ago, is that the federal judge who said to Trump today, you must reinstate DACA. He had given him 20 days to say, you know, he had said 20 days ago, he said, you've got 20 days to prove me wrong. I'm telling you to reinstate DACA, and in 20 days, I'm going to make that an absolute firm order unless you can change my mind. And Trump, during those 20 days, did not change his mind. This federal judge was appointed by George W. Bush. He is a conservative Republican. And he has said, you know, Trump blew up DACA in a way that was illegal. It was procedurally illegal, and it was legally illegal. So, yeah, I don't think Donald Trump is above the law, and I think that the law is going to catch up with him, frankly. Michael, thank you for the call. We'll see what happens. If it's true that the White House is in lockdown right now, and I haven't seen any, I've seen this on a couple of kind of lefty news sites. I have not yet seen it on the New York Times or the Washington Post. I was just checking the Washington Post a few minutes ago. So, you know, we'll see where this goes. But David in Fort Lauderdale, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I've been meaning to get in touch with you. I sent you a message on Facebook on this, but I've not really heard many people talking about this. So right now, the Democrats are looking like they might roll over and allow Trump to have hearings for a Supreme Court nominee. I'm trying to understand how that's justifiable when you've got potentially... Trump said that during the primaries and during the campaign that Hillary wasn't qualified to be president because she was under federal investigation. Well, there you go. He's under federal investigation. Second, he's about to put somebody on the Supreme Court for a lifetime appointment who could very well be the person who lets him off the hook if he's found guilty on any of these.
Right. This was the point. I predicted Brett Kavanaugh back when there were 20 appointees, and then there were 10 appointees, and then there were 5 appointees. At each stage, I said, it's going to be Brett Kavanaugh. He's the one guy out of the original 20 who had come out in public and, in fact, even wrote articles for the law review journals saying that the president cannot be questioned even. Forget about indicted. He can't be indicted. He can't even be questioned while he's sitting in the White House. And this is a guy who worked with Ken Starr harassing Bill Clinton for years and years.
Right. And what are the Democrats going to do about it? Because they should be boycotting and refusing to participate in the hearings.
I agree. Call Joe Manchin's office. Call Heidi Heitkamp's office. Yes. Call Claire McCaskill's office.
They should not be there and give them the time of day. And if they do, then they're complicit in what happens after that, because they should not be having hearings. This guy is potentially facing treasonous charges. How can you put a Supreme Court lifetime nominee on the bench or even give him the day? You know what I mean? Come on, Democrats, wake up.
Yeah, I'm with you. David, thank you for the call. Well said. Jeff in Wallingford, Connecticut. Hey, Jeff, we just have a minute to the break. You got a quick one?
Yeah, it's like the book, the crash of 2016 is coming to life.
I agree.
The stock market is no longer good. Our job growth is slowed. It's like everything that happened in that book. The one thing the book didn't anticipate was how good Obama would be.
Yeah. Or Trump's tax cut, frankly. The tax cut, while it's going to make the crash far worse, and it's going to make the depression that follows it much longer, the tax cut was a stimulus to the economy. And I could just see these guys sitting around, these Republicans in the White House and whatnot, sitting around saying, okay, how do we we're 8 years now into a recovery, or 7 years when Trump came into office. We're 7 years into a recovery. How do we, and it's never in history has it ever gone more than 9 or 10 years. How do we get this out to 11 years past the end of the Trump first term? Well, if we throw a $5 trillion tax cut in here, $1.5 trillion in the first year, that'll juice the economy enough that everybody will think everything's fine, and that's what they did. And, we'll see how long it lasts. I don't think it's going to last out this year. Jeff, excellent point. Thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In about 4 minutes, we'll be checking in with Bob Ney with Talk Media News. Find out what the news of the day is. Stick around. And welcome back. Oh my. George in Portland. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I just had a thought about the power of the pardon, preserving power, and what mechanisms could Trump employ to delay handing over power should he lose the next election? And how long could that really be drug out? Thank you.
Those are all good questions. Let's go through them one at a time. George, the first question was, again.
Yeah, not just preserving the power of the pardon, but power in general, and Trump's penchant for fake news, and Bill Maher said he might just not go. How long could he delay handing over power should he lose the election?
If he loses the election, I think it would mean that there was popular sentiment in favor of the Democrat who beat him, and I don't think he would be able to stay in the White House after January, whatever the day is for inauguration, the first Tuesday in January.
Okay.
So, I don't think that's going to happen. What was the next one?
The other part of it was, how will we ever know if any pardons in his corporate world of people that have taken a fall for him? I wonder if much of that's gone on. What about Manafort, if he did win the election? Those kind of people.
Well, I think, Manafort has not pled guilty for one of two reasons. Either one, they never offered him a plea deal, so he didn't have an opportunity. Or two, he thinks that Trump is going to pardon him. It's got to be one of those two things. And because, who would subject themselves to a trial like this? And I mean, he's functionally facing life imprisonment. The guy's in his mid-60s or even late 60s. And, if he gets a 10 or 20-year sentence, that's it. He's dead in prison. So, this is the kind of stuff that's going to be real interesting. And Rick Gates, if Trump did even imply to Manafort that there was a pardon in the cards, Rick Gates would probably know about it, and he's probably going to testify in Manafort's trial today. So, we'll see what comes out of it.
Yeah, also in that spirit, Don Jr., although he has to be drugged through the mud, the process has to be finalized. He's not looking at anything but a pardon himself. But, hey, great show, Tom, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, George. Good to hear from you. Cleveland, I'm not sure where you are. Where are you calling from, Cleveland?
Right in Georgia, Tom.
Uh-huh.
I just wanted to know, everything I've read says that Obama did the same thing with immigrants that Trump's done. He imprisoned children, that he kept their parents, that 24 died. Well, go read the report.
Cleveland, I can tell you for a fact, I don't know what, if you're reading Breitbart or what, but I can tell you for a fact that when asylum seekers presented themselves at the border and said, we are under international law and U.S. law, we are asking for asylum because we fear for our lives in our home country. 100% of those people who did that were granted the ability to seek asylum in the United States. Now, there might have been some people who were coming here for economic reasons, or people coming here who had committed crimes, beyond crossing the border illegally. And by the way, an asylum seeker crossing the border is not illegal. So these people that Trump are calling, quote, illegals, or saying that they broke the law, they did not, and they are not. But, that did not happen during the Obama administration. This is a brand new policy. To the best of my knowledge, it's never happened in the history of the United States. You can protest all you want. I know what I'm talking about, and you're wrong. Here we go. We're hitting a break. We'll be back with Bob Ney with Talk Media News right after this. Stick around. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. Online with us, the author of Sideswiped, Congressman Bob Ney. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Tom.
So what's going on in the world today?
Well, let's start with Iran, if we could, because
Sure.
the sanctions are kicking in today. This is round one. Now, these sanctions will go towards any entity that trades with Iran, dealing in gold, steel, aluminum, coal, any other minerals or metals.
The oil
Then,
sanctions
Tom,
kick in November, right?
Well, no, there's a second round kicking in November, yes, and that will be based on the oil. And there are some probably deals going behind the scenes with Saudi Arabia to make up for what Iran is not going to be able to pump. And frankly, Saudi Arabia will gladly do that because it wants Iran in a bad position and would like us actually go to war with Iran. So Saudi Arabia will be very happy to open the spigots.
Interesting.
So to say.
Interesting. What effect do we expect to see from this first round of sanctions? I mean, my understanding was that this was principally going to hit, that there's not that many American companies doing business with Iran anyway. This was principally going to hit European companies, Middle Eastern companies that had opened relations with Iran. But I've also heard that, you know, the EU has been looking for ways to protect European companies. Has any of that come to fruition?
Well, it's going to, because let me just, and I haven't seen this really in press reports, but let me tell you what was the victim of the first round here. 200 passenger jets. That contract has been canceled now. That's one of the first.
Was that Airbus or Boeing or who?
Well, by these sanctions, we'll cancel a contract for 200 license for sales of 200 passenger jets that were going to be used in Iran. Again, passenger jets. Iran has a horrible problem because originally under the Shah, of course, Boeing sold a lot of the jets, and then there weren't parts, and even Bush opened up the ability of Iran to get some parts for humanitarian purposes because, jets literally could just fall out of the sky and kill the average Iranian. So this is, I understand that from one report I saw, immediately when this came through today, that cancels the contract for the license for sale of 200 passenger jets.
Wow.
So we know that happened. Here's the other dilemma, because you've asked the right question. What about everybody that started to do business, whether it was China, Russia, a lot of Europe, started to do business because, we obviously undid the sanctions, as did the UN, for Iran to comply with the decrease of their nuclear, abilities and proliferation. Now, all these companies are sitting there. And so the president, with his new sanctions, just round one, not into the oil yet, is going to cause companies that are doing existing businesses, have existing contracts, just like I mentioned with the passenger jets, are going to have a problem because they're going to come under our law, could be sanctioned and arrested, tried in a criminal court for violation of sanctions,
and lose their lose their ability to do business in and with the United States as well.
Right.
So why, say for example, some machine tool company in Germany wants to continue selling machine tools to Iran, but they would also like to be able to continue selling machine tools to the United States.
Right.
Is it possible for them to spin off another company, make it a completely separate entity? Enron had over 700 different companies, and have that entity buy machine tools from them and sell them to Iran, but they could say, this isn't us doing it, this is a separate company.
Well, it's dangerous because President Trump, of course, appoints the Secretary of the Treasury, and Treasury monitors all of these things. If they wanted to, they could make literally a federal case out of it, and people could go to trial. So do companies really want to take that chance? But this isn't going to be one or two isolated cases of the passenger jets I just gave you. It's just going to be broad, and when the oil kicks in, it will be massive, because again, all of these were undone in a joint cooperation between the United States and Europe and Russia and China.
Bob, you know Iran better than anybody I know. Yes. You speak Farsi, you've been there, you've worked there, you've lived there. Is it possible that I think it's unlikely with these sanctions, and I'd like to get your opinion on that, but when the oil sanctions kick in November, is it possible that at that point Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz, the United States says, okay, that's it, and we go to war with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel get in on the act, and then Russia gets in on the act on behalf of Iran, and suddenly we're in World War III?
Oh, I think that it's a powder keg, and if Iran does react because its economy is going to tank and it will have, severe problems, if Iran reacts with the Strait of Hormuz, which is a narrow strait, with the massive amount of the world's oil supply going, you know how we would love to go to war over oil, and I think it could be a major confrontation, and Saudi Arabia would love it. Of course, they won't put any of their people in jeopardy. We would do that, and Saudi Arabia knows that. We would become their puppet in this situation. I think it's a powder keg. It has to be watched and has to be taken serious. The other thing here is this: having lived in Iran and with a couple of presidents, Clinton and Bush, and some Democratic members, we provided the ability to try to do back-channel talks when the White House, both administrations asked us to, for mutual needs that both countries have. There was at least a give and take. Look, the clerics are the clerics. They're not good. They don't treat the people right. But then there's progressives and moderates like Rouhani and others over there. And here's the bottom line, Tom. If the Trump administration thinks that they're going to topple or change that government by doing this, all they are doing is allowing the clerics who are living in the 12th century to be able to say, you see what America's doing to you. We're not doing it. They're doing it.
Right. We told you so.
Right. So this does nothing to have regime change over there. In fact, it sets us back, and it sets the Iranian people back, who the vast majority like us and the vast majority want to change in their country.
Right.
I mean, not long ago they were in the streets protesting their government over there, and now their government's going to be able to, again, blame every single thing on Trump and the United States.
Now they'll be in the streets protesting us. Amazing.
Sure.
Bob, what else is going on in the world today? Oh, I'm sorry, we're out of time. That was, but thanks for filling us all in on Iran. I mean, that's a to paraphrase Joe Biden, a BFD. Bob Ney, author of Sideswipe. Thanks a lot, Bob.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon. We will be back. Paul Levy's going to drop by. We're going to be talking about quantum physics, science, and spirituality. Let's take a break from Donald Trump for 5 or 10 minutes here. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. Our book for today is Into the Hands of the Soldiers, Freedom and Chaos in Egypt and the Middle East by David D. Kirkpatrick, who is the international correspondent for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1. Driving east from Tunis may be the best way to take in the miracle of the Nile. The road follows the Mediterranean coast for about 1,700 miles. Almost every inch of it is brown 12 months a year, rock and sand baking in the sun. Then you cross an invisible line at the edge of the Nile Valley. Everywhere is an eruption of green. Not even the congestion of Cairo can contain the riot of vegetation. For millennia, no other territory in the Middle East produced such a bounty. Where the yearly flooding of the Euphrates was violent and destructive, the cycles of the Nile were gentle and predictable. A truism holds that the histories of Egypt and Iraq followed their rivers. Medieval sultans dug a well, known today as the Nilometer, on Rauda Island in Cairo to measure the water level. The annual rise determined how generous the crops would be that year, and the sultans taxed the peasants accordingly. Farming was that easy. The Nile Valley became the breadbasket of the Arab world. Egyptians swelled with pride in their river. Whoever drinks the water of the Nile will return again to Egypt, the old saying goes. Egyptians also like to say that they have been rallying around grand national projects since the pharaohs built the temples of Thebes. After taking power in 1952, President Gamal Abdel Nasser decided to build a great dam at Aswan near the Sudanese border to harness the Nile for hydroelectric power. Abdel Nasser promised a dam more magnificent and 17 times greater than the pyramids. Excuse me. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles announced in 1955 that the United States and the United Kingdom would provide $70 million in assistance for construction of the dam, but he did not like Nasser's denunciations of colonialism or his refusal to ally exclusively with Washington. After 7 months, Dulles withdrew the offer. Abdel Nasser returned to Moscow. The dam became a monument to Stalinist engineering. Its construction displaced 120,000 Nubians, the dark-skinned Egyptians indigenous to the area. The lake formed by the dam nearly demolished the breathtaking pharaonic temples at Abu Simbel. UNESCO saved them by paying Western European contractors to relocate the complex, stone by stone, on drier ground. The finished dam stopped the flow of silt and nutrients that had kept much of the Nile Valley fertile for centuries. The depletion of the water devastated the farmlands downstream and the fishing around the mouth of the Nile. The slowing of the current led to an explosion in waterborne diseases like schistosomiasis. To fight the disease, Nasser's successors launched a massive campaign of inoculations. But government health workers reused unsterilized needles. That set off a hepatitis C epidemic that raged on for decades. About 1 in 5 Egyptians was infected with virus C, as Egyptians called it in imported English. Barbers spread the disease by reusing blades, so sensible Egyptian men carried their own personal shears to haircuts, as I did as well. The adage about drinking the Nile water lives on today as black humor. The river is so filthy that your first stop would be a hospital. Yet Egyptian school children are still taught to celebrate Abdel Nasser's high dam as an unalloyed triumph. I think of the dam whenever I get a haircut, a parable of centralized planning and unaccountable power. I had the luck to be an American journalist living in Cairo during the 30 months when Egyptians broke free of the autocracy that ruled them. Their escape set off revolts from Benghazi to Baghdad, but the old authoritarian order had only hidden underground, not shattered. It returned to take revenge. A reinvigorated autocracy did its best to blot out the memory of those first 30 months of freedom. Let me tell you this story. Chapter 2, City of Contradictions, August 14th, 2010. My introduction to Egypt was an iftar, the ritual meal at dusk to break the Ramadan fast, on a gritty day in August 2010. My family and I had moved that week into a one-story villa in Maidi, a leafy district about 6 miles up the Nile from the New York Times Bureau on the island of Zamalek. Both neighborhoods, Maadi and Zamalek, are full of Western expats and Egyptian old money. I had a 20-minute drive to work if the streets were empty. Usually the lawless traffic made the trip more than an hour. Mercedes sedans and Land Rovers veered around donkey carts stacked with carrots or garlic. Families of 4 or 5 crammed on the backs of Korean motorcycles, and mothers rode side-saddled with infants in their arms. My wife Laura and I had hauled our 1-year-old's car seat all the way from Washington. We felt so fussy. I was drawn to Egypt in part by the terrorist attacks of 9/11. I knew the roots of Al-Qaeda and its ideology ran back to Egypt. Also, I had turned 40 in 2010. I wanted a change from Washington, where I'd reported for the previous 6 years. That was about the extent of my preparation for my posting to Cairo. I was thrilled with the job. Egypt was home to a quarter of all Arabs, had set every major trend in religion, culture, and politics across the Arab world for more than half a century. Egypt commanded the largest Arab army and held together the region. It kept the peace with Israel. After Israel, Cairo had received more United States aid over the decades than any other country, over $70 billion, at the rate of $1.5 billion a year at the time I arrived. The book, Into the Hands of the Soldiers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And in the studio with me, I'm really pleased to have Paul Levy. He is the author of, most recently, The Quantum Revelation, a radical synthesis of science and spirituality. Sting, the musician, said the quantum revelation is mind-blowing. Paul, welcome to the program.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here, Tom.
Glad to have you here with us.
Yeah, really.
So quantum physics, you say this is the greatest, the most profound scientific discovery in the history of the human race,
Right.
and this is the thing, or a thing, that could save humanity?
Yeah, that's very true, and it's not just my opinion that it's the greatest discovery in all of history in the realm of science. I mean, that's beyond debate. What is up for debate is, what does it mean? Because it's such a radical discovery. And I'm pointing at that it's actually, when you understand what it's showing us about who we are and this, what the world, the whole nature of this reality, that it's offering us the solution, in a real way to the world crisis that we're in, and that's what my book is about.
So the key concept within quantum physics that you're hanging this on.
Mm-hmm.
Is, as I recall, is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle? Or
that's
that when you observe something, you...
Right, that's part of it. It's really the act of observing. So quantum physics didn't come out of a void. It came out of what, the pre-quantum physics, which was the Newtonian point of view, which basically was imagining that this world objectively existed, and that
it was totally mechanistic.
Yeah, totally mechanistic, deterministic, and we were just passively observing it, trying to figure it out. Well, quantum physics came in and basically proved that there's no such, that the idea of there being an objective world, that's an illusion. It doesn't even exist. And to even talk about an objective world is total nonsense. And so quantum physics actually discovered that the act of observing this world actually influenced, in the moment, the very world that we observe, that the act of observation, the observer, and the object observed were all interconnected parts of one quantum system.
Yeah. There was a debate about the spiritual nature of reality back in the
Mm-hmm.
18th century, as I recall. Dr. Samuel Johnson
Mm-hmm.
said, they got into this debate, and the question was asked to him, how do you refute the idea of an objective physical reality? And he said, I refute it thus, and he kicked a stone and hurt his foot. I mean,
Right.
how do you react to that?
Right. Well, the thing is that it's not to say that there's nothing out there. What quantum physics is pointing at is that it doesn't exist objectively separate from us in the way that we've been trained to imagine. So this phenomena of the observer effect is the doorway that really opens up what I'm pointing at, that quantum physics is actually offering humanity, because it's pointing at that the act of observation is creative, and that's always the case 24/7, but our species is enacting that unconsciously. And because it's unconscious, then it's actually the way that it'll manifest in our world will not be serving us, will actually be harming us. And that's actually playing out both individually and collectively
So
in
it's
the
like
body
a giant
politic.
feedback loop.
Yeah, it's an instantaneous feedback loop.
Yeah.
And so the point is that what quantum physics is pointing at, I mean, in a real simple way, is that this reality is It's exactly as if it's a collective shared dream that we're all dreaming up into materialization. But because it's a dream in a certain way, if we hold a particular viewpoint, then this dreamlike reality will instantaneously reflect back that seeming viewpoint as being seemingly objective. So then we have the evidence to prove to ourselves that our perspective is actually correct, that we're seeing what's objective reality. So we become more entrenched in that viewpoint, and it's a feedback loop.
This sounds very esoteric. Can we translate this into kind of a practical reality? When you're struggling with Donald Trump as president or whatever. I mean,
right. Well,
from a quantum physics point of view.
From the quantum physics point of view is that, okay, well, if what quantum physics is saying is true, and it's never been proven the slightest bit to have any inaccuracy whatsoever, then from that point of view, what we're experiencing now is a mass shared dream, which is to say that Donald Trump, that we've dreamed him up, all of us collectively have dreamed up
himself included.
Trump, himself included, as a dream character who's embodying a particular quality. Like for me, maybe he's embodying ignorance or just madness or narcissism. But if I'm seeing him as separate, then that, you see, the whole thing about quantum physics is that it's pointing out that there's no separation in this universe, that everything is seamlessly interconnected with everything else. That includes Donald Trump. So he's a dream character. He's a reflection of that part of me. And then as soon as I see that, then all of a sudden I'm not like reacting to him as if he's separate, which then, I become conditioned by my reactions. And actually by having that unconscious, reaction, I'm actually feeding the negative energy in the field.
No, I got it. And this is kind of the struggle for people who understand quantum physics and try to translate that into an epistemology, essentially, for lack of better description, a religious system. It's sometimes referred to as a New Age system or something like that.
Right.
That, it's just all a dream, or Hinduism, actually. I mean, this is 6,000 years old. This is the core of Hinduism, in fact.
Right.
But that it's all a dream. And then, again, we constantly come up against that Samuel Johnson problem. I'm being waterboarded. How do I tell myself this is just a dream?
Right. And like I was saying, it's not like that's not happening if it's waterboarding or kicking his foot on a stone and there's pain. But the whole point is that our experience is actually not objective in the sense that, you see, what quantum physics has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there's nothing objective outside of us, that we're part of the universe that we're observing. And the act of observing actually influences the very universe.
Even that implies that each one of us is a separate consciousness. I mean,
well,
isn't our consciousness part of the great consciousness, and isn't the great consciousness really the only thing that exists?
Yeah. So in other words, we're actually these microcosmic fractals. We're interconnected with the macrocosm, so we're not separate from the whole field. So what that means is that when any of us has an expansion of consciousness, that immediately gets deposited in the collective unconscious of our species. And so the idea, what quantum physics is really getting at is that we're actually interconnected with the universe and with each other, that we depend on each other, that we're interdependent. And that cuts through the whole idea of separation. Because if you see there's nothing objective out there, and that's what quantum physics is showing, what happened to the subject? If there's no object to have relationship to, what happens to us as subjects? So it puts into question, who are we? And that's where quantum physics becomes this sort of a path of having to do with, spirit, with spirituality.
Yeah. My wife loves this. Back 40 years ago in San Francisco, there was this guy, Sufi Sam, who was kind of a well-known Sufi master in San Francisco. And he had this theory that when we die, we go into the great goulash pot, the great soup pot. And we get all chopped up into a million little pieces and it just become part of the soup. And every time somebody is born, this is a reincarnation story, which is not what we're talking about here, but just for illustration purposes. When we're born, the great soup maker puts a ladle into the soup and pours it into the new body. And so our obligation as we go through our lives, and this is where I think it kind of meshes with what you're saying, is to brighten the soup, to lighten the soup, to heal the soup, to help the soup.
Right. Well, what quantum physics is saying, because we're interconnected, any one of us having a moment of expanded awareness or owning our shadow or seeing the dreamlike nature that expansion of consciousness gets deposited in the non-local field of the universe, and immediately there's more light in the universe when any of us begins to wake up. And not only that, we might be the actual us doing that, us having that moment of expanding consciousness could be the very catalytic sort of moment that will precipitate a global awakening in the entire species. I mean, that's a possibility.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing.
And if I could say one other thing, too, the thing about quantum physics.
I'm sorry,
okay.
We're out of time, Paul.
Oh, okay.
Paul Levy, excuse me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The book is The Quantum Revelation. Paul Levy is the author. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Yeah, totally, Tom. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Great. And welcome back, Marriott. Marriott in Littleton, Colorado. Am I saying your name right?
Yes, it's Mariette.
Mariette. So, hey, what's up? What's on your mind today?
Like Marietta, Georgia, but an H.
Oh, yeah. I used to live there.
Yeah, I am. I have a couple of questions. Well, a question, you mentioned DACA and that the judge, wants something to be done about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also wondering about these 572 children also that are in limbo that may not be eligible to be reunited or, with their parents. What does he expect to do with these children? I mean, was he going to give them citizenship then? Well, if they aren't reunited, what's going to happen to these kids?
I don't think they'd even thought it out that far. I really don't. I don't think they'd even thought it out that far. I think that Stephen Miller, this white nationalist racist in the White House who's driving this policy and in all probability came up with this idea, thought, oh, this will be something that'll get the white people cranked, and this is something that will be a great little moment for us, and this is something that'll make people feel like we're fighting, the white people who are concerned about brown people coming from south of the border, make them feel like they're fighting for us, we're fighting for them. And I don't think that they actually thought about what do we do with these children once we take them away from their parents. I think they just kind of had this thing in their mind that there's this giant foster care system and an adoption system that they'll just kind of merge into and vanish, which, by the way, is what seems to have happened with several hundred of these kids.
Right. The other point I have to it, is it possible to ever recall like Mitch McConnell? Can people of Kentucky vote on recalling him for not bringing,
No, they can be, Mitch McConnell, a United States senator can be impeached by the House and Senate, or they can be defeated in an election. And it's possible if they, if there was some basis for it, like they had committed some kind of crime or they'd been caught in some really, grody thing, that that the governor could, in their own state, and the state legislature, and this varies from state to state depending on how the state constitutions and state laws are constructed, but there may be a mechanism to remove a United States senator there. Although I'm not certain of that, but I know that it's happened, but I think it's always happened voluntarily. The kind of Mark Sanford situation, where they go, oops, you busted me, and then, bail out. Make sense, Marriott?
Right. Okay, well, I appreciate your response.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. I appreciate it. Yep, good talking with you. And Jim in Denver. Hey, Jim, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today? Jim?
Jim, yes.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, I just go ahead. We've got about 40 seconds here. Quick one, Jim.
Yeah, I disagree. You mentioned about the semi-automatic pistols should be only legal for military
and police.
The cops are using them, and that's what's killing all these black kids. They're getting shot 15, 16 times by those semi-automatic pistols.
It really just takes one bullet, maybe two at the most, Jim. If they still had revolvers, they'd still be killing black kids, as they have been for centuries. I disagree, respectfully.
Yeah. Well, those guns are good enough for Broderick Crawford and Dirty Harry.
There you go. There you go. Well said, Jim. Thanks a lot for the call. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. I appreciate it. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I wanted to just cover very quickly a couple of other stories that are in the news that I think are quite consequential and things that we should be paying attention to. You'll recall a week or so ago we had this conversation with Greg Palast about how the guy Brian Kemp in Georgia, who is running for governor, was the Secretary of State, and as Secretary of State, well, actually, he is the Secretary of State, I guess. But last year, in 2017 alone, we don't know what he's done this year, in the state of Georgia, he removed the names of 591,548 voters from the voting rolls in Georgia. Just took them off the rolls. And, I've been saying for a long time, I am of the opinion that the red shift that we're experiencing in the United States, that is the difference between what people tell exit pollsters when they leave the polling place and about who they voted for, and what the electronic voting machines say they voted for. For a long time I thought that most all of this could be accounted for by the machines being hacked. I mean, that was the only thing I could come up with. But now with these huge voter purges, I think that probably the largest percentage of this is actually the voter purge. That people show up to vote and they don't understand, they don't know that a provisional ballot is not counted. So you go in to vote and you say, "Hi, I'm Thom Hartmann, I'm here to vote," and the polling worker looks at you and says, "Well, I don't see your name here on the ballot or on the list, on the registered voters list." And so I said, "Well, geez, what do I do? I mean, here's my voter registration card, here's my ID, here's everything you want." And they say, "Well, we'll give you hey, George, bring over a provisional ballot, would you? Or bring over a provisional ballot, would you, for Tom here?" And so I get this provisional ballot, and I have no idea what provisional means. I think, that's the ballot you give people who aren't registered to vote or who had a glitch, but I still get to vote. Isn't that cool? And so I get this ballot, and I go through, and I mark it all up, and I say, "Okay, here's my ballot." And they say, "Thank you very much, put it in the box," and off you go. And I walk out thinking that I voted, when in fact I didn't, because the vast majority of Americans don't know that provisional ballots aren't counted. And so I walk out of the polling place, and there's the exit pollster who is saying, "Hey, how'd you vote, Tom?" And I say, "Oh, I voted for so-and-so and such and such," and they write it all down. And then when the machines are tabulating the votes at the end of the day, my vote doesn't get counted because it's a provisional ballot, and provisional ballots are only counted many days later if I go down to the Secretary of State's office and prove that I am who I am and reinstate me on the rolls and find that provisional ballot. And basically, bottom line is fewer than 1% of them ever actually get counted, period. And so then when the exit polls come out versus the voting numbers, well, in Missouri, for example, there's a 5.4% red shift. 5% of all the Democratic voters in Missouri thought they voted for a Democrat, but their vote didn't get counted. In New Jersey, it's 4.2%. Chris Christie's state. In Utah, it's 2.8%. In Maine, it's 3%. In Ohio, it's 4.5%. And Ohio is the state that went to the Supreme Court and said, "We want to continue removing people from the voting rolls. And we've got this system to do it. If they didn't vote in the last election, then we send them a postcard. If they don't send the postcard back, then we remove them from the voting rolls." And so, you've got midterms in there, and so that's the last election, right, that you didn't vote in, and so, you get nailed. And, this is, and who returns postcards, right? I mean, you'd think, what is this, a scam? Is this some kind of, we've all gotten this stuff in the mail that looks like official notice, right? From the National Information Clearinghouse Incorporated. But it looks like a government document. And it's like, census information or something like that on the outside. And then you open it up and it's like, when you fill out your census form, will you be sent, or something like, and most of us figure out this is a scam, right? This is some organization that's trying to, or some company basically that's trying to get me to respond. They want to know that I'm here. So they can sell me something. They can hustle me for something. And so you get a postcard, and the states that don't want you to respond, and particularly if they're selectively mailing these postcards into neighborhoods, of elderly people, college students, and people of color, and and cities that tend to vote Democratic, like downtown Portland, regardless of ethnicity. When they do this, some of these states actually go out of their way to make the postcard look like it's junk mail so that you won't return it. So you get the postcard and you just take one glance at it and go, oh, junk mail. And you just lost your right to vote. Now, I would think, and I'm guessing you would think, this is just absolutely wrong and should be illegal. But the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, the 5 right-wingers on the Supreme Court just a few months ago said, no, it's just fine, Ohio, go ahead. Knock another couple 100,000 people off your voting rolls, which Ohio is aggressively doing right now in anticipation of this election. And other states are going, oh, you let Ohio do it? I'm going to do it. The New York Times had a piece by Maggie Astor back in June titled 7 Ways Alabama Has Made It Harder to Vote. Now, this is not totally unique to Alabama. You'll find this all over the country. But Maggie is writing specifically about what happened in Alabama. Number 1, photo ID. Within 24 hours of the Supreme Court's ruling, now this was not the Ohio ruling, this was the ruling back several years ago that said that the Voting Rights Act, which was signed in 1965, the Voting Rights Act, which said that the states that have historically practiced Jim Crow kind of discrimination, in other words, refusing to let people vote, the states that had literacy tests, the states that had functionally poll taxes, that they could not make a change to their election laws without it being pre-cleared by the federal government. The Supreme Court blew that up. Within 24 hours of the Supreme Court's ruling, she writes, Alabama announced that in 2014 it would start requiring photo ID. That's number 1. Number 2, driver's license offices are closed in black areas in Alabama. Number 3, officials are pushing for proof of citizenship. Number 4, dozens of polling places are closed in areas that are black areas, college towns, and in older neighborhoods. Get Out the Vote group is hamstrung. Voter rolls are purged, and felony enfranchisement is not publicized.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Make no mistake about it. This is a system that the Republican Party has come up with to make it harder for you to vote, which means it's all the more important that we all show up. The Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is an 1856 first English translation edition of this author. And but you can still get it online. A lot of different booksellers sell it. This is from chapter 11. What sort of despotism democratic nations have to fear? I had remarked during my stay in the United States that a democratic state of society, similar to that of the Americans, might offer singular facilities for the establishment of despotism. And I perceived, upon my return to Europe, how much use had already been made by most of our rulers of the notions, the sentiments, and the wants engendered by this same social condition for the purpose of extending the circle of their power. This led me to think that the nations of Christendom would perhaps eventually undergo some sort of oppression like that which hung over several of the nations of the ancient world. But it would seem that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character, different from the Roman Empire, for example. It might be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. I do not question that in an age of instruction and equality like our own, sovereigns might more easily succeed in collecting all political power into their own hands and might interfere more habitually and decidedly within the circle of private interests than any sovereign of antiquity ever could do. But the same principle of equality which facilitates despotism tempers its rigor. When no member of the community has much power or much wealth, tyranny is, as it were, without opportunities or a field of action. As all fortunes are scanty, the passions of men are naturally circumscribed, their imagination limited, their pleasures simple. This universal moderation moderates the sovereign himself and checks within certain limits the inordinate stretch of his own desires. Independently of these reasons, drawn from the nature of the state of society itself, I might add many others arising from causes beyond my subject, but I shall keep within the limits I have laid down to myself. Democratic governments may become violent and even cruel at certain periods of extreme effervescence or of great danger. Think of George Bush and 9/11. But these crises will be rare and brief. When I consider the petty passions of our contemporaries, the mildness of their manners, the extent of their education, the purity of their religion, the gentleness of their morality, their regular and industrious habits, and the restraint with which they almost all observe in their vices, no less than in their virtues, I have no fear that they will meet with tyrants in their rulers, but rather guardians. I think then that the species of oppression by which democratic nations are menaced is unlike anything that ever existed before in our world. Our contemporaries will find no prototype of it in their memories. I am trying myself to choose an expression which will accurately convey the whole of the idea I have formed of it, but in vain. The old words, despotism and tyranny, are inappropriate. The thing itself is new, and since I cannot name it, I must attempt to define it. I seek to trace the novel features under which despotism may appear in the world. The first thing that strikes the observation is an immutable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures with which they glut their lives. Think now of a television society. Each of them, living apart, is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to them, but he sees them not. He touches them, but he feels them not. He exists, but in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. Facebook? That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood, but it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that people should rejoice, providing that they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains but to spare them all the care of thinking and all the trouble of living? Thus, it every day renders the exercise of the free agency of man less useful and less frequent. It circumscribes the will within a narrower range and gradually robs a man of all the uses of himself. The principle of equality has prepared men for these things. It has predisposed men to endure them and oftentimes to look on them as benefits. I have always thought that the servitude of the regular, quiet, and gentle kind, which I have just described, might be combined more easily than is commonly believed with some of the outward forms of freedom, and that it might even establish itself under the wing of the sovereign of the people. Our contemporaries are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led, and they wish to remain free. As they cannot destroy either one or the other of these contrary propensities, they strive to satisfy them both at once. They devise a sole, tutelary, and all-powerful form of government, but elected by the people. They combine the principle of centralization and that of popular sovereignty. This gives them a respite. They console themselves for being in tutelage by the reflection that they have chosen their own guardians. And it continues. It's a brilliant book, A Democracy in America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Here with you, and let's check out a geeky science report here. Maybe? Maybe not? I don't know. I'm not hearing anything. Okay. Take a vacation from exercise. Your body may not thank you. This is in the New York Times today by Gretchen Reynolds. It's a study that was done. This is a pretty shocking study, actually. You know, at the height of summer, she writes, naps on the beach can be alluring, and many of us find ourselves tempted to take prolonged vacations. Okay, in this study, what the volunteers did, in this study, what the volunteers did was they stopped moving around. These were people who, you know, they kept them to 2,000 steps a day or fewer, and they spent 3.5 additional hours each day sitting in an easy chair, right? 3.5 hours a day sitting on a couch or easy chair, pretty much not moving, like watching TV, and walking fewer than 2,000 steps. Now, I'm guessing most Americans walk fewer than 2,000 steps. That's what they had these volunteers doing. And at the end of a 2-week period, What they found was, these are people who had been more active than that. What they found was the volunteers almost all had developed what scientists call metabolic derangements during their 2 weeks of being still. Their blood sugar levels had risen, their insulin sensitivity had declined, their cholesterol profiles became less healthy, and they lost muscle mass in their legs while gaining fat around their abdomen in a 2-week period of not exercising. That's mind-boggling. Okay, that's our geeky science for the day. Now, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Noah in Alabama, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Noah, what's on your mind?
I live in Alabama, up in the northwest corner, and you were just talking about the voting in Alabama.
Yeah.
It is true, yes, they do require photo ID, but there's nothing wrong with that. The whole fact that that is considered
And they also
racist,
closed down the driver's license bureaus in the black parts of town for 6 months.
No, they have not, because we live right by a black part of town, and they are all open.
Yeah, well, you know, this is pretty solid stuff. I threw the thing away and I can't. Oh, here it is, right here. No, it's not. Let me get this article back. I'll read you exactly what she said about this. She says, photo ID doesn't support. Here, by November 2016, this was done in 2016, by the way. By November 2016, Alabama had at least 66 fewer polling places than it did in 2013 when the Supreme Court said, Alabama, you could just start messing with people. Because only 18 of Alabama's 67 counties were examined. They said, you know, they're not sure exactly what to derive from this. But for example, Daphne, a city of 26,000 near Mobile, eliminated 3 of its polling places in 2016, disproportionately affecting one of 2 districts with a significant number of black voters. A Reuters investigation also found racially disparate closings in the state of Georgia. Nationwide, 3,000 polling places closed between 2012 and 2016. More than 860 of the closings were uniquely in 7 states, including Alabama, where some or all counties were subject to federal oversight under the earlier Shelby ruling. So, you know, you may not be able to see it, Noah. You're not going to see people out on the streets, you know, waving their hands and going, oh my God, I couldn't vote, or where did the voting place go? But if you're black in Alabama, I'm pretty sure that you know that this is what's going on. Noah, thanks a lot for the call. Greg in Harlem, New York. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I just want to tell you, you know, I remember back in 1976, I was a congressional intern, and I was at, you know, college watching, a dormitory watching the 1976 Democratic Convention with Jimmy Carter being nominated. I'll never forget, Barbara Jordan said something very interesting. She said, the great Barbara Jordan, who we miss, she said, quoting Lincoln, I would not want to be the slave nor the master. And for those who speak violence and those who speak, well, let's go do this, those words, I would not want to be the slave nor the master. We cannot become like these right-wing nuts and these idiots.
Right.
We can't become like them, but we're just as bad as them if we become like them.
I agree.
That's all I want to say.
This was the great challenge, Greg, that Native Americans in this country, and there's been several books written about this, but probably the best is Peter Farb's books, Man's Rise to Civilization and the Native Americans of North America, that they confronted Europeans who engaged in genocidal warfare, and there were no Native American communities on North America who engaged in genocidal warfare. They had wars, but the object of the war wasn't to kill everybody on the other side. The object of the war was typically to draw the first blood and then let the guy go. You know, it's called counting coup. And so the Native Americans were like, you know, or in the Iroquois, they settled their conflicts by playing lacrosse. They invented a game to settle their conflicts. So they're looking at people who are coming in saying, we're going to kill all you guys. And they're faced with a couple of options. Number one, they can run. Number two, they can just stand there and die. Or number three, they can take up arms and become the people that they're fighting against. And different Native communities chose different of those 3 options. And it seems that, you know, I'm not sure that we can say any one of those 3 worked better for them, because they pretty much all got wiped out as a result of the superior technology of Europeans and the willingness of Europeans to commit genocide, which was not a willingness that was broadly available. For example, when what was the tribe? There was a tribe in the Northeast that the Americans had, or the settlers, they were British subjects at the time. This was in the 1600s. This was under Bradford, the governor of, who ultimately became the governor of that state. They enlisted one tribe to help them fight against another tribe, and these were tribes that had been traditional enemies. And when the when the white people came in and burned the village down and shot the women and children, the tribe that had been enlisted to help the white people said, "That's it, we're out of here. We're not going to have anything more to do with this." And I'm sorry, I can't remember the tribes, but you know, there's lots and lots of those stories, and I think that that's the same situation we find ourselves in, Greg, and it's a terrible one. Greg, thanks for the call. Well said. I really appreciate it. Really, really well said. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Tom, yeah, I wanted to explore something with you about the voting. I don't know what it's called when the state sends you a postcard and asks you to verify your address.
It's called caging.
What is that? What's that called? Is that called caging or something?
Yeah, at law, it's called caging.
Okay. I think that there is, this is unconstitutional under the Fifth Amendment. I would say that you're not obligated to respond to government in order to protect your rights, your basic rights.
I agree with you. The Supreme Court disagrees with you.
Is there a decision about that?
Yeah, the Ohio decision from 2-3 months ago. This is what Ohio is doing. Ohio's policy was if you miss one election, they send you a postcard. Originally it was 2 elections. They send you a postcard, and if you don't return the postcard, they take you off the voting rolls. And the Supreme Court said that's fine with us.
The argument I would make would definitely be under the Fifth Amendment. For instance, your Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate yourself, or you don't ever have to respond to government. And this would be, of course, because this has to do with the states, it would require incorporation of the 14th Amendment. But I guess I wasn't aware of that case. We need to recognize that our elections have consequences because that was what Neil Gorsuch helped Ohio do.
Yes, it was a 5-4 decision. You're absolutely right.
No kidding. Really? No, 5-4. And you know, the Roberts Court, more 5-4 decisions. Actually, most people don't know this, but 50% of the decisions, at least 50% of the SCOTUS decisions are 9-0. But the Roberts Court has more 5-4 decisions, I think, than any other court. And as all conservative courts, I know conservatives refuse to hear this, are more activists and more substantive due process than any liberal courts. They have overturned more laws enacted by Congress. That's their job, to overturn laws they don't like. And certainly Brett Kavanaugh is one of those. Mm-hmm. They are. This is the activist judiciary that the conservatives rail against. But that's exactly what they want when it's in their favor.
Yep, I absolutely agree, Paul. And if you can find out if this particular court in any one year or throughout the existence, since John Roberts has been Chief Justice, has handed down more 5-4 decisions than any other court in history, I'd love to know that. I'm writing a book on the Supreme Court right now. So,
I know that, and I would look at the court from the Lochner era through FDR through 1936, and you will see that there was that, and probably the courts during after Reconstruction. That was another period. They overturned acts by. I mean, look at you look at in 1918. This is 100 years ago. In 1918, Congress outlawed child labor under the Commerce Clause, under the Interstate Commerce Clause, and in Hammer versus Dagenhart.
And the court overturned it.
And overturned it, saying that this was William Rufus Day wrote the decision, if Congress were to outlaw child labor, they might outlaw all labor.
Right, because it was based on the right to contract.
Yeah, exactly, because people have a right to take the crappiest job available.
Right, exactly, even if they're 12 years old. Well said,
4 years old. I mean, they had kids working 4 and 5 years old were working in mills, mines, and factories, getting their hands and fingers chopped off. They had kids working in match factories were getting sulfur corrosion in their nose and their nasal cavities, and they said, no, this is perfectly okay. And Congress can't do anything about it under the Commerce Clause because this is what they said. The Commerce Clause does not extend to protecting workers.
Right.
That was in Hammer versus Dagenhart. Well, 100 years ago, and that's what we're back to. Brett Kavanaugh is a perfect fit for, anywhere from about 1870 to 1936. And you look at the decisions that were overturned. When we had the Four Horsemen, when you had George Sutherland, Willis Van Devanter, Pierce Butler, and the most slimeball of all, James Clark McReynolds. Those guys were big overturners of laws of Congress.
Oh, yeah. So,
and,
that 1918 case...
I mean, everybody knows the switch in time. That was Owen J. Roberts who came over to Roosevelt's side after supposedly the court packing scheme threat, but I don't think that's why Roberts switched over. But
I think he switched.
Conservative courts.
Yeah, I think he switched.
Down duly passed laws of Congress.
Yeah, and that was Daggett v. who?
1918, the child labor law was Hammer versus Dagenhart.
Hammer, thank you.
Hammer versus Dagenhart, 1918. That's part of the Lochner era.
Yeah. Amazing stuff, Paul. Amazing stuff. I got to move along, but thank you for the call, Paul. It's great to hear from you.
I'll send along whatever I find out, Tom.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good talking with you. Christian in Germany. Hey, Christian, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hello, Tom. I just have an idea because I follow the progressive discussion in the U.S. thoroughly since the how do you call it? Sorry, I'm not a native speaker, so I just.
Oh, your English is great. It's so much better than my Deutsch.
No, not the general election, but the before. How do you call it? I don't.
The midterm elections.
Pardon?
The midterm elections.
Not the midterm elections, but the elections for the parties. Sorry,
the primary elections.
I just messed it up.
Yeah, no, that's good. They're called primary elections.
The primaries. Sorry, I forgot it.
Right.
Tom, I don't know if you have the ability to, right now, as we're talking, to search at Wikipedia the term social market economy. That's a German system.
Mm-hmm.
German right-wing politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Konrad Adenauer, Ludwig Erhard, first Chancellor and first Minister of Economic of the Federal Republic of Germany.
Sure.
Invented after Second World War, including universal health care, a unemployment insurance in system which gives us Germans the safety you don't starve to death if you got unemployed, and you even have a modest, not so much, but a financial safety net for a certain period of time.
Right.
And the government or government agency support you by finding new jobs.
Yep.
Sometimes the service is mediocre, but that's all over the board. And this system is called social market economy, or has another name which might be more comfortable for the U.S. System of thinking, Rhine capitalism, after the River Rhine, because the then capital was at Bonn at the River Rhine. Rhine capitalism.
We call it democratic socialism here, what you guys have there in Germany, and we would like it. Christian, thanks so much for the call. I'm sorry we're hitting the break here, so I've got to bail out, but thank you for watching us on YouTube, and thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's nice to hear a German accent. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. 12 minutes before the hour, excuse me.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Laura in Champaign, Illinois. Hey, Laura, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I would like to bring up an issue that I haven't heard much at all being talked about. There are so many barriers to voting that have been created that even if a person successfully gets to the voting booth, their vote may have been changed on a rigged voting machine, or they've been given a provisional ballot, so their vote wasn't counted. And if you remember in the 2016 election, there were long lines of people all over the country waiting to vote. And I believe that there were more people voting Democrat than were recorded. And so I don't think that there was a shortage of people voting Democrat.
Well, Hillary Clinton got.
I believe that the votes weren't counted.
I think you're probably right. I think that a lot of people got provisional ballots, particularly in these red states or the states that are controlled by Republicans, like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And because they've been purged from the voting rolls, number one. Number two, it's entirely possible the machines were hacked. Whether they were hacked by Russians or Republicans, who knows? But, it's entirely possible. If the Russians could do it, the Republicans could do it, or the Chinese could do it, as Donald Trump said yesterday or day before yesterday. I mean, it's all possible, but and it shouldn't be. None of it should be possible. And, I think you're right, Laura.
Well, so when we tell Democrats to get out and vote, and they're up against the same barriers.
Well, here's the lesson for us, Laura. If they're going to steal the election by 5 million votes, we need to turn out 7 million extra people. Unfortunately, it's not enough to simply, do business as usual. I mean, if you look at gerrymandering, Pennsylvania sent I think it was 13 Republicans and 7 Democrats to Congress. But there were more votes for Democratic members of the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania than there were for Republicans. I mean, it should have been the opposite. And this is because of gerrymandering in that case. Now, so you combine all these things. You get the gerrymandering, you get the vote suppression, you get the caging, you get and this is how the Republicans have been able to seize and hold power. And hopefully they're not going to be able to do it very much longer. I think Donald Trump is wrecking the Republican Party. This is why people like Rick Wilson, who was a guest on our program in the second hour, are coming out now and saying, well, his new book, Everything Trump Touches Dies, are saying what they're saying. And from his lips to God's ears, I mean, may Donald Trump end up leaving the presidency. I mean, we'll see. But the fact that the White House is in lockdown right now, if these reports are accurate, and that we're not seeing Sarah Huckabee Sanders on TV, because nobody's going to go before the cameras right now after Donald Trump just confessed that his son committed a felony. And, oh, by the way, I didn't know anything about it. This has got to have blown the minds of people in the White House, just completely blown their minds. And I'm wondering if Mike Pence is sitting down with Donald Trump right now negotiating, Donald, if you resign, I will pardon you. And you don't even have to say that you're resigning because of these terrible things you've done and said. You can simply say your business needs you and you want to get back to making money. And you're sick and tired of the fake news or something like that. But we'll see. I mean, we'll know probably by the end of the day. But Laura, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. It's good to hear from you. It is coming up on 53 minutes, past the hour, about 7 minutes before the top of the hour. We'll be right back. It is 53 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. And Denise in Tobomash, Colorado. Am I saying that right, Denise? I suspect I'm not. Denise? Denise, you need to be listening to your telephone, not your, but I'm going to unlock the lines here. Give us a call back if you want to try it again, because you were calling about Buddhism, a topic that is close to my heart. Tim in Vermont. Hey, Tim, thanks for watching us. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Appreciate what you do. I'm just kind of puzzled here with what's going on in the White House, and I try to be as optimistic as possible when I say the White House with what's happening with Trump and the vote and all that.
Yeah.
And now all the decision in the Ohio Supreme Court, I'm kind of lost on where the votes, where are the laws, too many loopholes, who's being held accountable.
Yeah, basically nobody's being held accountable except voters, right? It's like, and the Republicans in these southern states, if they find a black person who has voted illegally because they're an ex-felon or because they're registered in another state or whatever, they are arresting them and hitting them with multiple years of prison. I mean, they're just like gung-ho. So anyhow, Tim, thanks a lot for the call. We'll see how it plays out. Nick, in New York, listening to Sirius XM, says here you want to tell me I'm wrong.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you always paint Europeans as these evil individuals that were more evil than any other human beings. And I'm sorry, that is racism in and of itself. In the Native Americans, you can't just say Native Americans. They were individual tribes that had their own cultures, their own way of life. And you know what? When the Lakota was thrown out of where the Chippewa Nation was, they overcame the Lakota. Lakota came over to the modern-day Dakotas. Lakota and Dakota are about the same thing. And when the Cheyenne saw them on the plains, they knew they weren't Plains Indians. They taught them how to live off the land. They took them in. And once the Lakota got proficient enough to live off those lands, they nearly destroyed them. They nearly killed them off. Ask the Hopi about the Apache.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with the Hopi-Apache wars. What you're talking about...
No, I'm just saying, it's ridiculous how it's always
Nick,
Europeans
point made.
wanted to kill
Nick,
every person.
Stop for a second. You made your point, and I agree with you. But you understand the history of why the Plains Indians came down, the Denny people. These were the people from southern Canada, why they came down into the central part of what we now call the United States?
Yes, and
it was
what I'm saying
800-900 years ago, there was a major climate change event. These people were fleeing famine. And yeah, there was war that broke out. But that was not something
the Chippewas overtook the Lakotas from where modern-day Minnesota is, and they threw them out. And they left their land, and when they came across the plains, the Cheyenne took them. And they nearly got wiped out by them.
Yeah. Got it, Nick. Nick, thanks a lot for the call. What a day. What a day. I think the crazier Donald Trump is, the crazier we all get, right? But Nick is right. I was hyper-generalizing, but broadly speaking, I refer you again to Peter Farb, one of the great anthropologists in the history of the United States, who'd studied first contact with Native American tribes over I think it was 34 different tribes across the United States, and did not find genocidal warfare, with the exceptions of people who are being pushed around by climate change. Anyhow, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, T-H-O-M, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.